A human hand in a black glove injects some substance into the yolk of an egg, and after a few minutes, it divides, producing an identical egg. At the same time, on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a star for Oscar winner Elizabeth Sparkle is unveiled. Time passes, the star fades, and soon Sparkle's name no longer shines as brightly. She herself now hosts an aerobics TV show. Despite her age, the woman is fit and looks quite good. However, one day she goes to the restroom, and seeing that the women's restroom is out of order, she enters the men's room. Inside a stall, she hears the voice of the show's producer, Harvey, saying that Elizabeth is outdated and the show needs a young and hot girl. It's time for Sparkle to retire. After all, her Oscar was won at the dawn of cinematography, and it's time to make way for the younger generation. Upset, Elizabeth goes to lunch with the producer, where he laughingly announces her retirement and leaves with a friend. The woman sees a fly in her wine glass and feels just as helpless. On her way home, the actress gets distracted by workers taking down her billboard, and she gets into an accident. In the hospital, the doctor recognizes the star and compliments her, but the woman starts crying because all her fame is now behind her. Embarrassed, the doctor says goodbye and leaves. However, a young nurse suddenly starts examining Elizabeth's back, muttering that she is perfect for an experiment. Before leaving, he slips a flash drive into her pocket with a commercial for a product called Substance. Elizabeth reads the name of the product when an older man calls out to her. It turns out to be her old classmate, Fred. He is happy to see her and offers to meet and reminisce about their youth. Fred writes his phone number on a random scrap of paper, and after soaking it in a puddle, he hands it to Elizabeth, who pretends to be happy to see her old friend. In reality, she falls into a deep depression, especially after she finds a bouquet at home, thanking her for being part of the team all these years. Rereading the word "was," Elizabeth inserts the flash drive into the TV and watches a commercial for a substance whose injection unlocks her DNA and initiates cell division, creating another version of herself. This is the substance, and the person is the Matrix. And while they were two different personalities, they are still the same person, just an improved version that will be younger, more beautiful, and more perfect. Both personalities must exist in symbiosis and switch every 7 days, always remembering that they are one whole. Elizabeth goes to a bar and, watching the happy couples, realizes her loneliness. She returns home, and after long thoughts and memories, she calls the number provided and orders the substance. She is given a postbox number where she can pick up the product, and the call is quickly ended. The woman spends a sleepless night, and in the morning, she sees an ad in the newspaper looking for candidates to replace her as the host of the show. At the same time, there's a letter in the mail with a card and the postbox number for the substance. Elizabeth resolutely heads to pick up the package. Using the card, she opens a hidden door in an old building and finds a storage unit with a package waiting for her. At home, Elizabeth opens the box. All the substance ingredients are neatly packed in bags and labeled activator, stabilizer, the other you, the switch, food for the Matrix, food for the other you. The activator only needs to be used once, but the stabilizer must be administered daily, and it's taken from the Matrix cells. Most importantly, the pair must switch places every 7 days without exception, and they must always remember that they are one whole. In the morning, Elizabeth spends a long time staring at herself in the mirror, noting the signs of aging. Eventually, she injects the one-time activator, after which she is struck by unbearable pain. The woman falls to the floor, writhing in agony as her back splits open, and from within emerges her younger version. This new personality gradually comes to her senses, and upon looking in the mirror, she sees the reflection of a young and very beautiful girl. For a while, she revels in her new state, but then she notices Elizabeth's body. First, the girl tidies it up, stitching up the horrible tear in her back. Then she goes to her bed. In the morning, the girl takes a shower, and suddenly she feels unwell. She pulls out special syringes and injects herself with the stabilizer, drawn from the spine of the unconscious Matrix, Elizabeth. Then she goes to the living room, delighted with her new, young, and strong body. Later, the girl goes to a casting call, buying a seductive swimsuit along the way. She takes the name Sue and has a stunning effect on the producer's assistants and eventually on Harvey himself. Sue is chosen to replace Elizabeth as the show's host, although the girl immediately warns that every 7 days she will leave to care for her sick mother. This completely wins over Harvey, as the audience will surely love it. Sue begins to enjoy the fame that once belonged to the original version. However, the week flies by, and it's time for the switch. Sue attaches special tubes to her arms, allowing the substance to flow through. Soon Elizabeth comes to, while Sue's body slips into a coma. The woman cleans herself up and goes to the TV studio, where Harvey presents her with a gift from the crew. Back home, Elizabeth marks the days when she can be herself on her calendar. She spends all her time at home. At the end of the week, she receives a message about a new batch of substance delivered to her postbox. After 7 days, they switch again. Sue enjoys her new life, starring in commercials and reveling in her growing popularity. But one day, she starts thinking about the Matrix body and sets up a secret room in the bathroom. Just as she finishes, her neighbor knocks on the door, complaining about the noise from the tools. Seeing Sue, the man is immediately smitten and offers his help, but the girl slams the door and hides Elizabeth's body in the secret room, then replaces her portrait on the wall with her own. Sue's show becomes wildly successful, with the ratings soaring, much to the producer's delight. The girl starts making new friends and attending parties. One evening, she brings a young man home, but when things get intimate, she suddenly feels unwell and remembers that it's time for the switch. Sue rushes to the secret room and performs an additional stabilization procedure. She spends the night with the young man and switches with Elizabeth later than necessary. When Elizabeth wakes up, she finds a living room in disarray and her hands twisted with gout. Struggling to put herself together, she calls the substance provider's number, but they inform her that the changes are irreversible and remind her not to forget that they are one whole. Elizabeth tidies up the apartment and then sees a recording of Sue's new show on TV. She is forced to admit that Sue is very beautiful. Later, she hears the neighbor asking Sue for a date, but she doesn't answer the door. Then she receives a new batch of substance. On her way out, she stops at a cafe, where an old man starts a conversation, lamenting that 7 days is too long to wait to return to one's body. He drops his cards, and among them, Elizabeth sees a card identical to her substance card. She recognizes the young nurse who advised her on the experiment in his eyes. He knows that with each time, it becomes harder to remember that you deserve the right to exist. Soon, the second part will literally start consuming her. Elizabeth runs home, bumping into Sue's boyfriend, who of course doesn't recognize her. But this makes her remember Fred. She dials his number, and her ecstatic classmate arranges a meeting at a cafe. Elizabeth dresses up, puts on makeup, and hides her hands under gloves. But unexpectedly, she sees a billboard with Sue on it. Her own reflection immediately disappoints her, and she changes her makeup, then wipes it off entirely. Crying, she rips off her dress and stays home, ignoring Fred's persistent calls, binge eating to cope with her stress and insecurity. When it's Sue's turn again, she steps onto the set and begins the show. However, during the exercises, she suddenly feels something protruding beneath the skin of her buttocks. The girl immediately halts the filming, and while the puzzled cameraman tries to understand what he just shot, she runs to the bathroom, where she finds a lump on her rear and pulls out a fried chicken leg from her navel. She realizes that while she is living an active life, Elizabeth is binge eating at home. Sue is furious. She complains to the substance operator, but all she hears in return is, "They are one whole." Weeks go by. One day, Sue urgently summons Harvey to announce that she will be the new host of their New Year's show, the pinnacle of her career. Sue is overjoyed. However, she is now abusing the stabilizer more and more, which causes Elizabeth's body to age rapidly. When Elizabeth wakes up again, she finds herself old and decrepit, with stiff joints and almost entirely gray hair. The woman calls the substance operator, and he suggests ending the experiment, but there is no way to restore her condition now. She tries to convince herself to stop the experience, but she can't give up such a beautiful second version of herself, even though her knees barely function. She remembers Harvey's gift. It turns out to be a cookbook, and Elizabeth throws herself into learning new recipes with renewed energy, while Sue continues to dominate the TV screens. One day, Elizabeth hears Sue laughing at her, mocking the aging star, which drives her to eat even more. Elizabeth becomes so enraged that she vows to end the experiment. The day for the switch comes, and once again, Sue finds a room full of leftovers and empty bottles. To gain independence and take advantage of the Matrix helplessness, Sue stockpiles stabilizers for 3 months. However, the day before the live broadcast of the show, the stabilizer runs out. Sue calls the supplier to ask for more, but he says Elizabeth is the only source, and they need to switch to replenish the supply. There is simply no other option. Sue, barely conscious, starts the switch. Her boyfriend hears strange noises coming from the bathroom, but the girl doesn't open the door because inside is now a hideous, bald woman with a deformed hump. Finally, she yells at him, and he runs off. Elizabeth, now a horrific creature, calls the substance operator and begs to end the experiment. Then she heads out for the final batch. Returning home, she drags Sue's body into the living room and prepares to inject her with the serum that will kill her duplicate. With the syringe ready, she looks around, staring at the portraits of Sue for a long time. She realizes she can't kill her young version. Elizabeth brings Sue back to consciousness. Seeing the half-empty syringe and realizing what Elizabeth had intended, Sue flies into a rage, beating her Matrix to death. Afterward, she goes to the New Year's show. She is dressed in a gorgeous gown, but suddenly Sue feels unwell and runs to the bathroom. It turns out that with the Matrix dead, Sue's body begins to rapidly deteriorate. First, her teeth fall out, making it impossible for her to smile for the sponsors, which Harvey so desperately wants. Then a nail falls off, and her ear drops off. In a panic, Sue rushes home where she injects herself with the last of the activator, hoping to create a new version of herself. But instead, a monstrous hybrid of both versions, Eliza Sue, is born. The monster recalls her audition and tries to beautify herself by putting on a dress and a homemade Elizabeth mask before heading to the show. When she arrives at the TV center, she steps into the stage and addresses the audience, but her mask falls off. Screams of horror fill the hall, and she is called a monster. The audience flees in panic, and one man decapitates Eliza Sue, after which her mutilated body floods the entire hall with blood. What's left of Eliza Sue runs out of the studio, and out on the street, it disintegrates into guts. Elizabeth's original face manages to crawl to the actress's star on the Walk of Fame, where it looks up, smiles, and melts away. The next morning, the remaining puddle of blood is scrubbed away, erasing the memory of the actress. At times funny but mostly terrifying, the film dissects society's imposed standards on women's bodies and the pursuit of eternal beauty, forcing viewers to reflect on what it means to be yourself and how important it is to accept who you are. In the first scenes of the film, a woman is driving a car on a night highway. Suddenly, an unknown woman's voice speaking Russian comes from the radio. Joe translates for her daughter Alice, explaining that the woman believes the world has turned upside down. A police car appears behind them, and an unknown device lying next to Joe starts blinking alarmingly, but the police car drives past. Soon, the pair arrives at a small house. Joe starts a fire and puts the child to bed. She then goes outside to check the device left in the car but hears her daughter scream and rushes back inside. However, Alice is asleep. Joe runs outside again, hears her daughter scream again, and runs off into the night. 5 weeks earlier, Joe is floating weightlessly as part of a group of astronauts on the International Space Station. She only sees her daughter and husband Magnus via video calls, and she conducts her next session from the cold nuclear fusion laboratory where Mission Commander Paul is working. He adjusts the equipment according to instructions from scientist Henry Calder on Earth. The scientists are searching for a new state of matter, but no one knows what it is. Suddenly, something crashes into the space station. Communication with Earth is lost, and a fire breaks out. Additionally, the commander's hand is trapped, and one of the Soyuz ships is severely damaged. Roscosmos takes charge of the repairs while the mission's doctor amputates Paul's hand. Henry insists they must save the capsule containing the cold fusion experiment results. Meanwhile, Joe goes into open space to inspect the crash site, unaware that Paul's heart has stopped. Suddenly, video contact with Joe is lost, and the center can only hear her communications. She then sees the cause of the accident: a desiccated body of a female astronaut in an orange suit labeled USSR. Joe tries to catch it, but the space mummy floats away. Joe reports everything to her colleague, and Irina, the head of Roscosmos, hears it on Earth. Learning of the commander's death, the center orders 3 mission members to return to Earth on Soyuz 2, while Joe repairs Soyuz 1-inch and returns on it. An emergency mode is set in the ship. Joe sketches the body she saw, sends it to the center, and begins repairs. Meanwhile, Irina tells Henry she ordered his equipment to be left on the station, as it may have caused the accident. Henry argues that this experiment could change humanity's life and must be brought back. The returning Soyuz 2 astronauts are greeted on Earth. Joe is asked to retrieve the capsule with the experiment results, after which communication is lost. On Earth, Henry brings equipment for a rescue mission to Baikonur, but Irina reports that there are no signs of life on the station. Joe is alive and continues repairing the equipment, resting in the shuttle where Paul's body lies. Later, she records a message for her family, but unexpectedly hears a man's voice telling her not to breathe. She flies to the laboratory door and, opening it, sees Paul reaching out to her. Joe shakes his hand, realizing it's the commander's severed limb. Meanwhile, on Earth, Henry pulls strings to send a rescue mission to the station, avoiding questions about his twin brother. At this time, his twin brother Pat Calder is on vacation on a cruise ship, answering a journalist's questions about his spaceflight and snapping at her for confusing him with his brother. Jo restores the power supply of Soyuz 1 and returns for the cold fusion capsule. She records a final message to her family and launches the shuttle. Unexpectedly, the automatic detachment doesn't work. It must be done manually from inside the station. Jo, in desperation, punches the console as a shadow approaches the inner control panel and the system activates. The shuttle heads to Earth, where Jo is presumed dead. The module soon lands in a deserted steppe where rescuers find Jo and help her out. She is placed on a stretcher and taken to a helicopter. However, Alice rushes to her, and Jo happily embraces her daughter and husband, who seems to doubt his wife's genuine joy at seeing him. Henry retrieves the capsule, and Jo is taken to the helicopter where her family is already seated. But suddenly, Jo finds herself alone in an empty vehicle. Then everything returns to normal. She decides it's due to stress. She speaks to her daughter in Swedish, but Alice doesn't understand her. Meanwhile, Henry rejoices over the successful quantum mechanics experiment results conducted on the ISS. Jo recovers after the flight. One day at a press conference, she expresses condolences to the widow of the deceased astronaut Paul, but the woman's name turns out to be different. Henry demonstrates the experiment results obtained on Earth. His assistant is sure this is only possible in space, dismissing it as a glitch. At Baikonur, an investigation into the tragedy begins. The commission reviews orbital recordings. When Jo mentions the object that caused the accident, a Soviet female astronaut's body, no one believes her since there has never been a report of a missing female astronaut in history. Later, Jo receives vitamin tablets she must take daily. She tries to get closer to her husband, not noticing he seems to avoid her. Alice also keeps her distance from her mother. The next day, Jo faces the commission again, which tries to convince her that the station collided with an orange garbage bag. After the session, her boss, Frederick, tries to hug her, but she steps back in confusion. He doesn't understand why she has forgotten everything between them. Scared, Jo returns to her husband in tears, confesses her love, and they become intimate. Meanwhile, Henry tells Alice about a thought experiment in quantum mechanics called Schrödinger's cat. Scientists believed the world was governed by classical physics laws until geniuses like Einstein discovered that the same substance could exist in two forms. For example, a particle is black in one world and white in another. Between worlds, there is space where the particle is both black and white simultaneously, refusing to choose until observed. Henry invented equipment for the space experiment and discovered something, but it seems unwilling to come into the light. Magnus confesses his wife has changed completely. Henry comes to thank Jo for saving the capsule. She recalls he worked on the Apollo mission, and the old man warns that people who go through the space often change. Later, the team goes to the memorial alley, and Jo shows friends a photo of the spacesuit she saw in space, but she's told it's Irina, the current director of the Flight Control Center. The colleagues reach the tree planted by Commander Paul before the flight and lay flowers. When Jo is alone, she suddenly sees Paul, who tells her his heart is still hanging in space. After this, Jo acknowledges the commission's correctness and retracts her initial testimony. Her family heads home, where Jo notices some inconsistencies. For example, the car is blue, but Jo remembers it was red. The family congratulates Jo on past Christmas and her birthday. She jokes and laughs, though Magnus admits he believed their marriage was over. The next morning, Jo walks around the house and suddenly sees a piano. She sits at it and opens the sheet music. In the evening, Jo again notices her daughter doesn't understand her Swedish, though the girl spoke it fluently before the flight. Magnus admits he knew about her affair with a colleague, Frederick. This perplexes Jo as it's not true. Henry recalls a formula where the main stress relief component is lithium-7. Jo visits a psychologist who prescribes her the antidepressant lithium. Henry notices her and invites her to see his laboratory, where he talks about astronauts who heard non-existent sounds and smells after flights. But this is kept secret. Then Henry reports to the management that using laser and magnets in the cold fusion laboratory, he obtained an image identical to the one from the quantum physics experiment on the ISS. He tried to capture the moment when a substance exists in two different states simultaneously. The same experiment with Schrödinger's cat, which can't be determined if it's alive or dead. But only Henry sees the results. Apparently, this is the observer effect, where the experiment influences the experimenter. Jo approaches the piano again and starts playing this time, scaring herself because she never knew how to play. The next day, Joe compares the vitamins she received at Baikonur with the prescribed medicine and finds that both contain lithium-7. Suddenly, she sees two workers and hides in an office, finding a list of astronauts. Each name has a letter, and checking those under B, she discovers they were all prescribed lithium-7 and experienced unusual things. Meanwhile, the workers enter the office, ignore Joe, and start stacking folders on a cart. She tries to get their attention but seems invisible. Joe approaches a man closely. He screams and disappears. Joe is alone in the office again. She goes to Henry's office, but he suddenly accuses her of excessive curiosity that will ruin her. Later, her colleague Frederick visits, not understanding what happened as they loved each other. Joe avoids the conversation. At home, Joe finds a package with tapes on the table. It turns out the Marine Observatory workers, unlike the Flight Control Center, heard her calls from space and recorded them, now sending them to her. Joe plays the tapes and hears her voice when Alice comes downstairs and sees a room filled with mourning people. Live astronaut Paul with his family, and Joe's portrait in a mourning frame at the center. She screams, but her father carries Alice upstairs, where his wife admits all her pills are neuroleptics, meaning she's been intentionally habituated to them. She believes she was heard but deliberately left to die in space. Magnus grabs the phone to have her taken for treatment, but Joe pushes him and he falls, hitting the floor. Joe pulls herself together, calls an ambulance, and asks Alice to get in the car. On the way, she stops by the laboratory and steals the flask with the substance obtained in the quantum physics experiment. Henry hears a knock at the door but finds no one in the hallway when he opens it. The scientist closes the door, not noticing his twin brother Pat, who briefly appears behind him and then disappears. Irina calls, having just read an article about two particles entangled by quantum mechanics, where what happens to one determines the state of the other, even if they are far apart. He hangs up without responding. Joe calls Russian cosmonaut Ilya to ask what vitamins he was given on the ISS. He reads out the name with letter A. Joe explains that, unlike the rest of the crew, she was given neuroleptics. The cosmonaut is skeptical, but she asks him to check his pills and wait for her call. Henry discovers the flask theft. The next morning, Joe asks her daughter to describe her fears in detail. The girl admits she hears the voice of an unknown woman named Valya. Joe steps aside to call the observatory worker who sent her the tapes, but he unexpectedly claims it couldn't have been her and hangs up. Meanwhile, Alice brings her a drawing of her fear, showing the figure of a female astronaut in an orange suit, whom Joe saw dead in space. Ilya checks his pills, which turn out to be vitamins. However, documents on the substances given to Joe are no longer accessible. Joe arrives at the Marine Observatory and meets the brother and sister who sent her the tapes. The elderly couple clearly heard her voice from space and recorded it. However, the recordings can only be heard on their ship at sea. They take Joe and Alice to a boat, sharing strange stories of people seeing odd things in space like angels, and often going mad upon returning home. They recorded everything, but there was little noise until Apollo 18. During that mission, the airwaves were filled. Deciphering these messages is challenging. The boat sets off, and the woman plays a tape recorded in 1967. It features the voice of a female astronaut returning to Earth in a damaged capsule, seemingly dying. That day, Irina allegedly returned unharmed from space. The woman can also let Joe hear Paul's voice, though everyone says he's dead. Joe refuses to listen. They head back to shore, and Alice secretly calls her father, revealing their location. The woman gives Joe the tapes. Mother and daughter drive to a forest cabin, analyzing everything that happened. Alice plays the 1967 tape again, recognizing Valya's voice from her visions. The woman is in pain and very hot, as heard on the tape. Henry looks into a mirror, calling his twin brother. When Pat appears in the reflection, Henry accuses him of stopping his medication and admits his space experience worsened everything. Joe and Alice continue listening to Valya, who says the world is upside down. Reaching the house, Joe plays a recording of her conversation with Alice before the collision, but the girl suddenly claims it wasn't her, as she doesn't speak Swedish. The action shifts to the ISS on the day of the accident, showing the other side of Schrödinger's cat experiment. Paul conducts a quantum physics experiment while Joe talks to Alice when an alarm sounds. Joe is thrown against the window, hitting her head and losing consciousness. Paul tries to help her, realizing she's dead. Her husband and daughter are informed of her death and fly to Baikonur. On the orbit, Paul stays to repair the shuttle, worried that accessing the laboratory is impossible, leaving the experiment results on the station. Joe's body is moved to the shuttle, but Paul struggles to accept her death's reality. Later, he rests before landing, recording messages. Again, he feels Joe is alive and even asks her not to breathe. He then contacts Houston, reports the body's damage, moves her from the ship to the station section, and locks her there. Preparing for undocking, the system fails. Mission Control reminds him that 2 people are needed to activate the system. Paul, like Joe in another reality, hits the console as a shadow approaches the inner control panel and the system activates. The shuttle lands safely. Paul's family greets him, but he can't forget what happened, feeling guilty for leaving Joe's body on the ISS. He goes to her tree, laying flowers, and suddenly sees Joe before him. They stare at each other for a moment, then she vanishes. Later, Paul tells Joe's family how she died when he sees his portrait in a mourning frame. He's distracted by a question about visiting a psychologist and snaps back to reality. Later, the astronaut appears before the commission and recounts the experiment and the accident. Suddenly, the crew members object. They know nothing about a quantum physics experiment. That project was closed 12 years ago, and the order to leave Joe's body in orbit, it was his decision, not an order he received. Meanwhile, Alice is deeply affected by her mother's loss, constantly feeling that something is off. At the same time, Paul reviews footage from the Apollo 18 mission and is surprised to discover that 2 astronauts died during the launch under Henry Calder's command. He goes to his boss, but she only knows Pat Calder. There was no equipment and no Nobel Prize. The Apollo 18 mission was NASA's biggest failure. The man returns to his family and realizes that his wife's name is different from what he remembers. Later, his family goes to Joe's house for a memorial service, but Alice is hiding in the closet again, refusing to come out, convinced that her mother is alive. Seeing his crew, Paul doesn't want to enter the house, but his wife persuades him, though he admits everything feels wrong. Then his daughter brings Alice. He turns his head and sees another Alice screaming about what's happening in the living room. Joe rushes to the sound, seeing Alice from Paul's reality and trying to call out to her mother. Magnus takes his daughter away, and she asks to be taken to her mother's cabin. The next day, Magnus and Alice go to the lake house. At night, the father confesses he doesn't understand his daughter, who insists they will see their mother again. Meanwhile, Paul visits the house of Henry's twin brother, Pat, calling him Henry and stating that he conducted experiments under his direction. He wants to know the truth at any cost, but Pat pulls out a gun and shoots him. Alice sees a car approaching the cabin, and Joe gets out. And then everything gets confusing, so friends, forgive me if something is unclear. The girl hurriedly puts on her shoes and goes outside, but it's empty in front of the house. She calls for her mother, and Joe, in another reality, from the beginning of the film, turns at her voice but doesn't see her daughter. Alice returns to the house, puts on a coat, and goes out into the night with a flashlight. Joe distinctly hears footsteps passing by, but sees no one. They wander around the same place, shouting, hearing voices, but not seeing each other. In her reality, Joe and Alice sit in the cabin, listening to space recordings again. The girl admits her memories are different. Firstly, she doesn't speak Swedish. Also, her mother said Paul conducts experiments in the lab. The problem is the mother remembers nothing about this lab. She explains that the merging of 2 different realities is the result of a quantum experiment aiming to capture superposition, the moment when one thing exists in different places simultaneously. The girl suddenly confesses she feels Joe isn't her mother. Meanwhile, in another world, Magnus, accompanied by Henry and the police, heads to the lake house to retrieve Alice. Joe, stepping out to check the device, hears Alice's scream from the snowy field again. But her Alice is sleeping in the cabin. Joe runs outside again, heading towards the scream. At this time, parallel Alice finds a similar cabin, but it's cold and empty. Despite the building's similarities, the girl finds many discrepancies. For example, the picture on the wall is different. She goes upstairs and finds a closet. Hanging her necklace on the handle, Alice climbs inside. But the door suddenly slams shut, and the girl starts banging and calling for help. Joe, wandering through the field, also sees this cabin. She rushes to the banging and finds Alice. Joe carries the girl to her cabin, puts her in a hot bath, and admits that Alice smells like herself again. Stepping aside, Joe finds herself between 2 worlds, with Alice standing by the bed in one and the girl sitting in the bath in the other. Suddenly, the second Alice stops seeing Joe, gets out of the bath, and calls for her mother. But Magnus wakes up and runs to her. Alice admits she saw her mother, but now she's gone again. Joe, meanwhile, orders the second girl to get dressed and takes her to find the second cabin and the other Alice. Magnus's car is stopped by a blocked road, but the police inform him that a bulldozer is on the way. Alice asks her mother to come back, and Joe admits she doesn't belong to this world, urging them to figure out where the Joe from this reality went. Alice runs away, accusing her mother of madness. The second Alice goes to find the second cabin. Magnus follows her. The girl walks across the field, seeing a bead from her necklace in the snow. She follows the trail and finds a bag with a quantum device. Parallel Alice finds the second cabin. She enters, looks around, and takes an identical tape recorder, climbing into the closet. The second Alice also arrives at this closet and sees the tape recorder inside. The first Alice turns on the recorder and records her voice, calling Alice. The second Alice turns on the tape recorder and hears her own voice asking her to say something. While the girls establish contact, their parents search frantically through the frozen field and house. Joe finally reaches the closet. In her reality, Magnus approaches the same spot. Joe finds the tape recorder and hears the conversation between the two Alices. Magnus sees and hears the same thing. Terrified, he calls emergency services, reporting his daughter is missing at the lake. Joe gets into the car and heads towards the lake, as the kerosene lamp in her cabin falls and sets it on fire. The two Alices, sitting in the closet, look into the mirror and suddenly see each other. They say they are both looking for their mom. One Alice confesses that her mother died. At this moment, Joe notices the fire behind her. She turns the car around. The two Alices compare memories shared by Joe and conclude that their mothers switch places. Meanwhile, on the winter road, Henry Calder admits to Magnus that when he was on the moon, he thought his crew had died. But miraculously, they were alive. After returning to Earth, he started treatment. Rescuers finally arrive at the lake and start searching for Alice. Henry sees the fire blazing. Joe returns to the burning house, but upon entering, she finds no fire. However, the mirror reflects a burning room. Joe goes upstairs and finds her daughter in the closet, witnessing the conversation between the two Alices. Henry finds his quantum device stolen and lost by Joe. Joe hears the voice of the second Alice and sees her in the mirror. The girl asks her to come home, but Joe doesn't know how to do it. However, she promises to figure it out. She realizes the girls are dying, one in the fire, the other from the cold. She pulls the girl out and hands her to Henry, who has just arrived. Then she returns to the fire. Henry lays the girl in the snow and also calls for help, while Joe walks around the burning house. Suddenly, she sees Alice lying in the snow. She tries to revive her, hearing her voice behind. Turning around, she sees the second Alice, who suddenly says she doesn't feel her double. Apparently, the girl died, but Joe continues giving artificial respiration, believing she must save the girl. Suddenly, Magnus's voice calls out from the darkness. Joe tells her daughter to leave. Magnus sees his wife, unable to believe his eyes, and runs to her, finding his daughter. In the parallel reality, Joe revives the second Alice and starts looking for the second Alice. Rescuers grab her, thinking she's crazy. In the other world, Magnus brings Alice into the cabin, admitting he doesn't know what he saw. The injured Alice lies under an IV and suddenly hears a female voice promising to take her to her mom. The girl wakes up, seeing her father, who says Joe left with Irina. In reality, Joe is taken to a psychiatric clinic. Henry finds the tape recorder and listens to his report, discovering his colleagues are alive. He smashes his quantum device, destroying the experiment results. Magnus brings Alice home, and the girl says her mother is dead, her body still in space. Also, there is another Alice. Magnus tries to convince her that mom is alive, just not well right now. Meanwhile, a piano is brought to Joe's room. Henry is arrested for attempting to kill Paul and murdering a journalist on the ship. He requests his DNA be compared to the person who lived where Paul was shot. He's not Pat. The accuser suddenly says both men are actually the same person and shows a book written by Pat. Henry denies writing it, revealing that his so-called twin brother is actually his double from another reality. Later, Henry shows the broken device to Frederick, blaming Joe for damaging expensive equipment. He has long opposed sending women into space, believing their psyche is unstable. That night, Joe regains consciousness and tries to escape the clinic, but the door is locked. In the morning, Irina examines her, finding no mental disorders. Joe claims there was a fire in the cabin, and before that, she saw her real daughter. Irina asks her to play the piano and says her daughter is with her father. Joe is impossible to convince. Then Irina announces that Joe is pregnant. They couldn't give her lithium, as they never prescribe it to pregnant women, so they developed special vitamins for her, which Irina asks her to take. Joe is horrified and refuses. She can't have this child, because then she won't be able to return to her real life. Irina says there's another patient like her in the next room, but she won't be able to see him. Joe suddenly recognizes her as the dried-up mummy in space. She screams the words she heard on the recording, but Irina runs away. She calls Henry and asks for a meeting. Pat Calder is interrogated with a lie detector, denying shooting Paul, though he invented the machine that could cause an accident in space. Joe sits at the piano, but Ilya comes to her. She's very happy to see him, asking him to find out where Henry Calder is. But he suddenly starts convincing her that Joe is experiencing astronaut burnout, which fortunately is treatable. Joe repeats that the ISS collided with Irina's body. In that reality, it wasn't Paul who died, but her. Ilya doesn't believe her, and she asks him to leave. He says goodbye and secretly slips a key to her door, signaling that the room is bugged. Magnus tells the doctor he also saw Joe in the dark. Parallel. Magnus says he wants to get closer to this new Joe. Irina meets with Henry. He recalls her flight when she returned alive and unharmed, but years later he learned that Irina died in a space accident. She convinces him they both survived such accidents but returned, though they always felt another person nearby. Henry suddenly declares he's not Henry. He disappeared and won't return. He's the person who won the Nobel Prize. That night, Joe escapes her room, goes to the next room, and sees two identical old men. She returns to her room. The next day, Paul's daughter discusses a strange feeling with Alice. The girl feels her father's presence. Alice confesses that her mom is also halfway not here. In the parallel reality, Paul's daughter is puzzled by her father's strange behavior, who went to see a crazy old man and got shot. In both realities, Alice finishes talking to her friend and gets out of the closet. One asks her father to take her to mom in the hospital and pulls out a tape recorder. The other packs the deceased Joe's things and also finds a tape recorder. The girls simultaneously turn them on. When Joe in the hospital starts playing, they connect with each other. Later, the second Alice tells her father there's another Alice and promises she won't search for mom anymore. The prosecutor reports the complete identity of all tests, confirming that Pat and Henry are the same person, and presses charges. Sometime later, Irina comes to Joe, announcing there's only one person in the next room, the first one in space. She advises Joe to take the pills and return to life. She has a daughter and will have another child. She advises Joe to reconcile and move on. Later, Magnus and Alice arrive at the clinic. The girl talks about the other Alice and also advises her mother to accept what happened. She needs a mother, and Joe needs a daughter. So they will move on. Later, Joe shows Magnus their daughter's drawing, admitting she tries to be rational. She will return home and move on. They will have this child. Irina writes a letter admitting that since her flight, she has hidden the fact that space drives people crazy. She asks everyone who has experienced this to report it to her. At the clinic, Paul regains consciousness, unable to understand what he saw and experienced. Magnus takes Joe home, admitting she doesn't look like his wife. But they love each other and want to be a family. Irina says goodbye to Alice, admitting she has a second name, Valya. Meanwhile, on the orbiting ISS, Joe's mutilated body suddenly comes to life and catches a photo of herself with her daughter. This is where the first season ends.
This is the police. This is the police. The scoops are on their way.
New York, 2022. The mindless activities of humanity have led to environmental pollution and global warming, complicating life for mankind. The polluted atmosphere has destroyed nearly all natural wildlife, leaving people to fend for themselves. Natural foods are scarce, and people survive on concentrates produced by the large corporation, Soylent. Their latest product, Soylent Green, is made from plankton and promises to feed everyone. However, it is currently produced in insufficient quantities. New York Police Detective Frank Thorne lives with his old friend, former police analyst Solomon Sol Roth, who has an excellent memory and serves as a kind of archive for Thorne. Moreover, he has preserved a police reference library to help his friend with investigations. This day begins with a conversation about a recent murder. Sol grumbles that Thorne expects too much from his notes. This isn't the Congressional Archive. Meanwhile, the power goes out. Sol reminisces about the old days when food was real and electricity worked without interruption. But people ruin nature and now everything is dying. The man sits on a bicycle which generates energy for the apartment, while Thorne heads to work, stepping over the bodies of homeless people sleeping right on the staircase of his building. The streets are clogged with old cars that, due to a lack of fuel, now serve as homes for the poor or as venues for criminal meetings. In one of these cars, a young man named Gilbert receives a metal meat hook and instructions for an upcoming job from a criminal world representative. Meanwhile, in the apartment of the wealthy William Simonson, his girlfriend Shirley plays on a machine gifted to her. She is very pleased with a successful move and thanks her master when the security guard Fielding arrives to remind the girl that it's time to go. The couple heads to a store where the vendor sells them expensive products and shows them an item completely unattainable for ordinary people, a beef tenderloin. At this time, Gilbert uses the hook to infiltrate the residential complex for the privileged and ascends the Simonsons' apartment. Seeing the young man, the wealthy man remains completely calm, making no attempt to flee or call for security. Gilbert apologizes and explains that those who sent him can no longer rely on Simonson's silence. The wealthy man agrees with all his arguments and calmly confirms that what Gilbert is about to do is necessary for God. The young man raises the metal hook and strikes Simonson on the head. Sometime later, Thorne arrives at the deceased's home to investigate the case. He questions the caretaker, who assures him that the cameras malfunctioned, and leads the detective to the apartment, where Shirley meets him. Ignoring her, Thorne examines the body of the deceased. Searching the apartment for clues, Thorne finds and consumes whiskey, beef, and other foods unavailable to him. Fielding talks about the shopping trip, and the policeman enjoys washing his hands in clean, warm water. He then collects the found papers, some pleasant items like toiletries, and the food into a separate bag, taken from Simonson's bedroom. Meanwhile, Shirley is distraught, thinking that if she hadn't left, Simonson would still be alive. But Fielding refutes her certainty, saying that she likely would have died too. Later, Thorne interrogates the girl, examining her hands. He doesn't fully believe in her sincerity, but Shirley assures him that she wouldn't risk her job. The fact is, she belongs to this apartment, like furniture. Now she will wait for the new tenant if he wants to keep her. At this time, Thorne is informed about the arrival of the sanitation crew. He orders them to take Simonson to the dump, but the crew reports that the wealthy man will be sent to the incineration plant. Shirley is saddened by this outcome, as she still remembers her grandmother's proper funeral. Thorne takes the bag of items and leaves. He returns to the apartment, stepping over the bodies of the homeless, and hands Sol gifts he hasn't seen in a long time: clean paper, soap, and pencils. He also lays out a classified Soylent report related to oceanography found in the deceased's apartment. Sol is overjoyed to see vegetables and cries at the sight of meat. The next day, Thorne goes to work. His boss, Lieutenant Hatcher, is unhappy that the case is still unsolved, but the policeman is convinced that the murder was a contract killing. Nothing was stolen from the apartment, there was no security, and the killer used a meat hook instead of a weapon to simulate a simple robbery. Therefore, the first thing the detective decides to do is check the bodyguard, and after tracking the man, he finds his girlfriend, Marta's apartment. Thorne searches the place, notices a spoon on the table stained with strawberry jam, and concludes that this is too luxurious an item for the bodyguard's girlfriend. Returning home, he sits down for dinner, prepared by Sol from the products he brought the day before. The friends savor long-forgotten tastes, and then Sol gets to the report. Studying the books brought by Thorne, he learned about Simonson's biography and his longtime partner Santini, who now serves as the governor of New York. Together they created the Soylent Project, which became very profitable for its developers. Thorne goes to the phone booth on the corner and reports to the lieutenant what he has learned, unaware that the person who gave Gilbert the meat hook is in his office. Meanwhile, a party is taking place in Simonson's apartment, organized by Shirley. Thorne arrives and demands answers to his questions. Shirley can't say anything specific, as Simonson didn't confide in her. However, she does know Santini. Simonson introduced her to him. In fact, Simonson had been acting strangely in recent months, worried and even visiting church. The couple retreats to the bedroom when the building manager bursts into the hall. He behaves very rudely with the girls, and Thorne declares that he asked them to gather to ask questions. The manager is forced to back off, but the upset girls leave. Shirley offers Thorne to stay the night, take a real bath, and enjoy breakfast. She doesn't like being alone and is happy with the man she likes, as the others don't ask her opinion. Thorne agrees to the invitation. The couple takes a shower together, enjoying amenities unavailable to ordinary mortals. Later, Thorne visits the church where the deceased wealthy man had gone. On the porch, he finds a dead woman with a child tied to her hand. Realizing that the mother can no longer care for her daughter, he takes the child and carries her into the church. But the building is crowded with people who have nowhere else to go. Finding the priest to whom Simonson confessed, Thorne tries to question him. However, exhausted by the huge, sick, and hungry flock, the priest only remembers the fact of the wealthy man's confession, not its details. Yet, under pressure from the policeman, he admits that the truth is killing him. It's so monstrous. Thorne returns to the lieutenant, who informs him that the Simonson case is closed, as it's a simple robbery. He asks to rewrite the report, but Thorne refuses to do so, finding everything too suspicious. For refusing to obey, Hatcher assigns Thorne to patrol the streets. That same day, Governor Santini is informed about the persistent policeman who refuses to close the case. Learning about Thorne's visit to the priest, Santini orders his elimination. Fielding goes to confession. Meanwhile, Thorne is patrolling the street where the Soylent distribution center is located. A large crowd gathers, and soon the product runs out, causing discontent among the crowd. The police recognize the danger and try to quell the unrest. However, people start rioting. The killer sent after Thorne tries to get close to him as machines with scoops arrive to load people into the truck beds and take them for processing. The killer shoots but misses, killing a woman standing next to the policeman. The crowd goes wild. The killer tries to reach Thorne, injuring several rioters and wounding the policeman in the leg. Thorne tries to capture him, but seeing the weapon, pushes the guy. He flies straight under the scoop of a machine and dies, depriving the policeman of the opportunity to question him and learn the truth. Nevertheless, convinced of Fielding's involvement in the conspiracy against him, Thorne sets up an ambush in the bodyguard's girlfriend Marta's apartment. The men fight, during which Thorne accuses the bodyguard of killing his boss and implicating the corporation in the attack on the policeman. Finally, he warns the man to stop following him, otherwise it will end very badly. After this, Thorne goes to Shirley. At this time, Solomon brings the oceanographic report to a group of scientists who call themselves the Investigators Bureau. Shirley has just finished bandaging Thorne and offers to go somewhere, but he doesn't know where they could run. Everywhere it's the same: hunger and a dying earth. The girl is upset as the new tenant is arriving today, but the policeman is sure she will please him. Meanwhile, the scientists announce the results of their research to Saul, and it is truly horrifying. Simonson, being a member of the Soylent board, learned everything, and his psyche couldn't handle it. The corporation realized they couldn't rely on him. To prevent him from talking, they eliminated him. Now, before going to the Supreme Council, they need to gather evidence. Saul is so shocked by the discovery that he decides to go to the place where they will help him die. Meanwhile, a new owner moves into Simonson's apartment. He meets Shirley and finds her attractive. That evening, Saul goes to the place, notifying Thorne in a note. The policeman immediately rushes to his friend. Saul is just answering the manager's questions. His favorite color is orange, and his favorite music is classical. The man is escorted to a private room where two young people help the old man undress. He is laid on a couch, classical music begins to play, and scenes of nature that no longer exist. Vanished forests, extinct wild animals, lost rivers, and the beauty of the ocean appear on a huge screen. At this time, Thorne arrives at the house of the Lord, and they guide him to Saul's room, but the doors are already closed, and entering is impossible. The detective can only watch his friend's last moments through a viewing window. He watches the beautiful scenes with Saul, marveling at the lost beauty of nature. But Saul notices him and is happy to be able to say goodbye to his friend. Before dying, he tells him about his discovery and begs his friend to find the evidence and reveal the truth. After waiting for the end, Thorne follows the stretcher, carrying his friend's body. The man manages to sneak into the basement, where the bodies are loaded into large trucks, and he climbs onto one of them. Soon the truck arrives at the center for processing human bodies, and Thorne watches as the bags are unloaded and sent inside the factories. The man goes inside and soon finds a conveyor belt that lowers the bodies to a lower level. Thorne follows them, and after tracking the process, the man realizes that Soylent Green is made from processed human bodies. However, the guards spot him, and the policeman has to flee, killing several guards trying to detain him along the way. He soon reaches the city and tries to contact his precinct, but the line is busy. Then Thorne calls Shirley's apartment and asks the girl to stay with the new tenant and just live. Finally, Hatcher responds, annoyed by his subordinate's actions. But Thorne doesn't have time to say anything before he is attacked by the corporation's men, led by Fielding. The man fires back and runs to the church, though he is wounded. However, Fielding rushes after him. He searches for the policeman among the people filling the church, notices blood drops, and follows them. But Thorne attacks first. A fight ensues, people wake up and scream, but the policeman manages to kill his enemy with a knife picked up from the floor. At this moment, Hatcher arrives. Thorne tells him what he has learned and urges him to tell the Bureau members that the ocean is dying, and the plankton from which everyone thinks Soylent Green is made no longer exists. Soylent Green is made from people. So the corporation is intentionally breeding people like livestock. The lieutenant promises to take the necessary measures. Thorne is taken away by paramedics, but the man continues to shout that Soylent is made from people and asks the lieutenant to stop it. The final scenes replay the images shown to the dying Solomon Roth. The adaptation of Harry Harrison's novel turned out to be terrifyingly beautiful and compelling. The most frightening thing is that there is no resolution, nor can there be. Even if people learn the truth, what will change? And the focus of the plot on ordinary people conveys the fragility and insignificance of human lives, which remains unchanged throughout all times. People often fantasize about immortality. But what if a person could live for a few hundred years or thousands? What would an immortal look like? What would they do? How would they relate to family and religion? In 2007, director Richard Shankman attempted to explore these questions in the science fiction film The Man from Earth, and this fiction makes us contemplate the real. That's the case with John. There's a grave disorder. Is he serious? He is. The film begins with scenes of a 35-year-old man loading his belongings into the open bed of a pickup truck. Two cars approach his house. People step out of them. Dan, Sandy, Harry, and Edith. They are colleagues and friends of the main character, Professor John Oldman. They are puzzled. Why is he planning to leave and without saying goodbye? Dan jokes that he must be in a hurry to take over a chair at Stanford, and Harry shows a basket of food, regretting that they don't have enough time. Otherwise, they would have arranged something grand. Edith notices a painting near the car. She's in awe. It looks very much like a Van Gogh, but she's never seen it before. John says it's a gift from a friend. Edith is surprised. It looks like an authentic one. John invites his friends into the house. They ask him to tell the truth. Why is he leaving his home and 10 years of teaching? John responds that he can't stay in one place for long, but his friends don't believe it. It can be that he moves so frequently. He's only 35 and he hasn't aged a bit in the last 10 years. Any woman on the faculty would give anything to know the secret. At that moment, Professor of Archaeology Art Jenkins arrives with his student, Linda. He gives John a book about prehistoric caves as a memento and also wonders where John is heading. Again, John says that he just enjoys moving around and brings out an expensive bottle of whiskey. People become more cheerful and forget about the uncomfortable questions. They form a circle and wish him a long life and good luck. On the shelf, Dan finds a strange bone artifact. It's a flint knife, a silicon tool for carving wood and bone. The Cro-Magnons used it in the Paleolithic era. While the group examines the artifact, John suddenly asks, what do they think an Upper Paleolithic human would look like if they could have lived to the present time? Dan replies that, as Art's book says, he could be just like any of them, and if he had lived for centuries, he would have changed with each passing century, meaning that the Upper Paleolithic people had the same intelligence as modern humans, they just knew less. Linda is curious. According to the biologist, what would sustain his life? Biologist Harry says that it would require complete cell regeneration. It is believed that the human body is designed for a lifespan of around 190 years. Edith laments, as many would love to know the secret of eternal life. Harry responds that what is magic for one time is science for another. After all, Columbus and Copernicus were once considered mad. And then John reveals that he could have traveled with Columbus, but he isn't the adventurous type. Moreover, he was already convinced that Earth was round. However, back then he still believed that there was an edge somewhere that one could fall off. The friends give uncertain smiles, thinking it's a joke, right? But John denies it. Every 10 years or so, people start to notice that he doesn't age and he has to leave. The friends are puzzled. Is he saying he's a Cro-Magnon? John explains that at least for the last 4,000 years, since the time of Mesopotamia, he's been sure of it. In his first life, he lived to about 35 years old and became the leader of his tribe because they believed he was a sorcerer. He didn't even have to fight for it. But then fear arose and they banished him. People believed he was stealing their life force to remain young. He was pursued because he wouldn't die. That's how the habit of joining new tribes he encountered along the way emerged. At first, John thought something was wrong with him. Maybe he was evil and that's why he couldn't die. Then he thought he might be cursed, or on the contrary, blessed. Later, he believed there was some purpose to his existence, and now he thinks he simply came into being. His friends are intrigued. John's story is full of interest. Edith is curious again about the fate of the Van Gogh painting, and John tells them that Van Gogh gave him the painting when John was Jacques Born, a pig farmer. Van Gogh used to visit him, paint, and talk about how nature finds its reflection in art. Art asks, "Did you always leave?" John shrugs. Sometimes he created a new identity for the next 10 years. Sometimes he even posed as his own son. But a few times he got caught. He even spent a year in a Belgian prison in 1862 for forging state documents. His friends start to get annoyed. John seems to have an answer to everything except one. Why does he do it? And he answers, he just wanted them to say goodbye to him specifically. After this, those around him conclude that John has serious issues. He remembers about moving. He still needs to take the boxes. While the man is carrying his belongings, Harry tries to find hidden microphones or cameras. People just can't believe that what is happening is real. At the car, Sandy confesses her love to John. He says that she's not indifferent to him either. But now she understands what she's getting into, right? Because one day he'll be forced to leave. He cannot give her eternity. But she objects. What is eternity, and who has it? Her parents divorced even before she was born. Besides, there's death, illness, insurmountable circumstances. Nobody knows how much time they have, whether it's a lot or little. She loves him and will accept everything he can give her. John and Sandy return to the house. Their friends say that they still have more questions. For example, does he remember any of his native languages? The man replies that he remembers a little. Besides, they haven't changed much. And did he engage in cave painting? Yes, he knew a man named Daru who was excellent at his work. He painted animals that hunters hoped to kill and eat. Once, after an unsuccessful hunt, the leader knocked out all his teeth for failing with his magic. After that, someone had to chew his food for him. Eventually, he developed jawbone inflammation and they abandoned him. Then John headed east. It was at the beginning of the Bronze Age. He walked along trade routes and learned the languages of the places he visited. Everywhere there were myths about the creation of the world and new gods. He was a Sumerian for 2,000 years, then a Babylonian during Hammurabi's reign. For some time he sailed as a Phoenician. It seems he spent his whole life on the road and learned a few new tricks. He even staged his own death a couple of times. He made it to India and met Buddha, the most remarkable person he had ever encountered. Buddha taught John many things he had never pondered before. In the midst of the debate, Dr. Will Gruber arrives. The doctor says that there's absolutely no way for John to prove the truth of his story, and no way they could verify it. He's either their friend, or a caveman, or a liar, or a lunatic. The doctor is curious. In this extensive life being discussed, did he ever get sick? John answers affirmatively. Like everyone else, he had serious illnesses, perhaps pneumonia or other lung infections. He suffered from typhoid, yellow fever, and smallpox. He survived the bubonic plague, and it's even more horrifying than history tells. But he doesn't have any scars. Among the friends, a debate flares up. whether to believe John's stories or not. They contradict all their notions about nature. Dan is puzzled. A person with John's intellect would have studied a lot of things. John confesses he has 10 scientific degrees, including all those his friends have. He earned his biology doctorate at Oxford in 1840, but his achievements are just an excess of time, not brilliance. Suddenly, Dr. Will pulls out a gun. He asks John if he would survive if he is shot, but John never claimed he was immortal, just very old. The doctor is curious. What does John think about death? Is he afraid of it? John explains that ancient people thought about death, but they had a practical understanding. They stopped moving, fell, and never got up. Infections were incomprehensible. Aging was the biggest mystery. So at first, John thought that everyone around him was wrong. After all, they aged and died. And again, the friends ask, what is it like for a person when everyone they knew has died? The doctor asks John about his parents, but he says he only remembers glimpses. The doctor remarks that it's not surprising. He too remembers his father very vaguely. Will starts reasoning about what's fair and what's not. They will all die and he will keep on living. If that's true, it's not surprising that they might feel envy and even hatred. He accuses John. The others are outraged and try to stop the doctor, but he says that John is living an unjust life. Perhaps it's time for him to die. The doctor leaves, and then Harry informs everyone that Will's wife died yesterday, which is why he's so aggressive. John runs after his friend to apologize. Meanwhile, the others discuss John. The theory of illness comes up. John returns. The next question from his friends is whether there are others like him. The man admits that in the 17th century he met someone like him, and that person told him everything, confirming that he was just like John, but from a different time and place. They talked for 2 days and then parted ways. Edith asks if he believes in God. The friends become engaged as religious questions are close to everyone. Did he meet anyone from the Bible? Was he a part of religious history? Numerous theories are suggested. Edith is outraged, considering it blasphemy. John recounts that he once encountered Buddha and he liked what he heard. He had been contemplating the teachings for 500 years. Then he became Etruscan and infiltrated the Roman Empire. He didn't like how it turned into a massive killing machine. He went to the Middle East, thinking of passing on Buddha's teachings in a renewed form. He tried, but he was one dissident against Rome. Rome won, and the rest is well known. So John was Jesus? Yes, during the crucifixion he blocked the pain. He learned this technique in Tibet. He also slowed down bodily processes so much that they couldn't be detected. Everyone thought he died. They took him down from the cross and laid him in a cave. When he regained consciousness, he wanted to leave unnoticed, but a bunch of fanatics wouldn't let him do that. So he resurrected and headed to Central Europe. He can't prove it. He has no scars, and besides, they tied him down. But blood and nails look more convincing on icons. Edith is outraged. John deeply hurt her feelings. The friends start discussing religious questions. John says that he preached that Christ's teachings were about tolerance, brotherhood, and love. Life is here on earth, here and now. But then the talking serpent persuaded a woman to eat the apple, and everything went awry. Heaven and hell became tools for priests to rule with reward and punishment, trying to save souls that people never lost. John observes rituals, ceremonies, processions, genuflections, the moans of singers and choirs, and he thinks this is not what he meant. At this time, Dr. Will returns. The debates about religion, Christianity, and piety continue. The friends racked their brains. Was it the fabrication, a mental disorder, drugs? But they can't find a solution. John completely baffled the 4 scientists. He continues to explain that religion is not what is happening now. The church grew out of fairy tales. Even the name Jesus grew out of John. He never claimed to be the Son of God. He wanted to share knowledge. He did not walk on water or resurrect the dead. The friends gather to leave, although they are excited by his story. Edith pleads again to say that he's not Jesus, and she starts crying. The lights come on. Will demands that he admit that it was all a joke, and then John confesses that it was just a story. Their outrage knows no bounds, but John says that they themselves pushed him to this thought. They said he doesn't age. Edith saw Van Gogh, then found the chisel. They themselves bought into his game, and he couldn't resist seeing how they would react to his words. After all, he had such a splendid audience: an anthropologist, an archaeologist, an expert in Christianity, a psychologist, and a biologist. Linda, standing in the doorway, asks if the name Oldman is a play on words, old man. The infuriated people leave except for Will. He stays in the room, and John sees his friends off. Sandy asks what other telltale names did he come up with for himself, and John starts listing: John Political, John Hermit, and about 60 years ago when he was teaching at Harvard, he was John Thomas Party. Will's voice is heard. Wait, 60 years ago? John Party? John turns to him and says that his mother's name was Nola. Will initially denies every word, but in tears he confirms Nola was his mum. But he can't believe it, and he asks for the name of their dog. John names it Woofy, and he asks if she got married again. Will says he feels cold, and John pities the old man. He was always cold. Will tries to touch his face. His father had a beard, and John confirms that he always checked if it was real. Will collapses. An ambulance and police car arrive at the house. They carry Will's body on a stretcher, covering it with a sheet over his head. Everyone leaves. Sandy asks if he has seen his adult child die before. John shakes his head. He gets into the car and drives away from the house. Sandy looks at him. The car stops at the bend. Smiling, she walks towards it. The Man from Earth is a very ambiguous movie. However, it makes you wonder. It raises very complex questions about morality, ethics, and religion. It is fascinating to follow the flight of human thought and to think, what if?
I can make you very special.
Hundreds of years ago, people completely exhausted the planet's resources, leading to a total degradation of the population. The best scientists took it upon themselves to save the dying world. A renewable energy source was found. However, the greatest danger remained humanity itself. Differences led to divisions between the best and the worst. It was then decided to improve humans as a species. On their 16th birthday, everyone undergoes a procedure that makes them physically perfect. No longer does anyone need to envy others or prove their superiority. Tally is one of those waiting for that day. For now, she is called an ugly, but she has the opportunity to see what she will look like, as she can choose her eye color or skin quality. That evening, she sneaks onto a bridge where her friend Paris is waiting for her. They watch a party in the City of the Beautiful, envying those who are already there. Paris is 3 months older than Tally, and tomorrow he will undergo the operation and move to the city. Tally will have to wait her turn, and she fears that Paris will forget about her. But he assures her that she will always be his squints, and he will always be her nose. He arranges to meet her in a month. The next day, the students gather in the main hall to greet those whose time has come. Dr. Cable talks about all the advantages of being beautiful and calls forward the future beauties. Paris says goodbye to Tally, and a girl named Shay, sitting next to her, notices this. In the evening, Tally returns to her room and remembers how she and Paris met when they arrived at school. He called himself Nose and she called herself Squints. One day the boy hurt his hand and the girl intentionally cut her palm. From that moment on, they shared a mark of ugliness, a scar on their palms, and the belief that they were perfect for each other. The next morning in class, Tally talks about the white tiger orchid, which supplies energy to the cities and decorates the fields. That evening, she undergoes the mandatory scan for her future transformation, where she chooses gold for her eye color and dreams of reuniting with Paris, from whom there has been no news. The day of the arranged meeting arrives. The girl sneaks onto the bridge, but Nose is not there. Tally decides to sneak into the City of Joy. She reaches the outskirts, where a party is in full swing. Suddenly, a mask falls from above, allowing its owner to change their clothing. Tally puts it on, selects a dress, and heads out to search for her friend in streets filled with lights, laughter, music, and celebration. Miraculously, she finds Paris, who barely recognizes her. Even the scar on his hand is gone, though he swore he wouldn't remove it. It turns out that after the transformation, an ugly person's life becomes entirely different, where an eternal friendship oath no longer matters. Tally removes the mask to remind him of herself, but immediately becomes an unwanted presence. She runs, grabbing a rescue vest on her way. Realizing she is about to be caught, Tally jumps from a skyscraper. The vest saves her, and she manages to reach the bridge, but she is pursued, and just as she is about to be caught, Shay arrives to rescue her on her hoverboard. The girls immediately feel a kindred spirit. Tally shows Shay how to sneak into the locked kitchen and tells her that her meeting with Paris left her disappointed. One day, Shay suggests that Tally learn to ride the hoverboard and gives her a forbidden book to read. Tally learns that Shay told her friends about her jump with the rescue vest, and now she is the heroine of the entire campus, which could lead to her being denied the operation. But she continues with her lessons and masters the hoverboard. Later, the girls discuss beauty, and unexpectedly, Shay reveals that she doesn't want to change at all. For now, she takes Tally to a training ground where, choosing the most difficult track, she puts on a masterclass. After riding, Tally returns the book, in which she enjoyed the free flow of everything in the world, from natural seasons to relationships. Then Shay suggests that they both refuse the operation and escape with her to the smoke, a place where people live freely. She takes her friend to the edge of the school grounds, and after leaving their tracking rings on a branch, the girls fly into the wildlands. Crossing a river, they arrive at the ruins of an old city. Shay shows her the remnants of a roller coaster, lamenting that it is destroyed. She takes her friend to a tall building where they can call her friends from the wild world by lighting a signal fire. Shay explains that in the outside world, people work for themselves, love, and have children. There are even old people there. Everything is like in the book they read. Shay was planning to escape with her friend David when she saw Tally on the bridge and came to her rescue. She wants to read books and have hobbies because after the operation, a person no longer decides how to live. Tally doesn't understand this, as she has dreamed all her life of being beautiful. So Shay leaves her with a coated path to the smoke and departs with David, whose fire lights up on the neighboring rooftop. Tally returns to the city, where the day of her transformation soon arrives. Unexpectedly, instead of the operation, she is taken to Dr. Cable, who turns out to be well aware of her friendship with the missing Shay. She insists that David is holding Shay against her will, brainwashing her. And only after Tally finds Shay and returns her to the city will she be allowed to become beautiful. A distressed Tally returns to her room, where Paris visits her. He advises her to do as Dr. Cable asks, as it is the only way they can be together. Tally agrees. Dr. Cable explains that the residents of the smoke are planning to destroy the city and have developed a weapon that Tally must find and neutralize. She sets off, receiving a pendant to activate when she finds the weapon. Tally follows Shay's instructions, and after reaching the ruined roller coaster, rides it until she reaches an old railroad track. She camps in the forest for the night, lighting a fire, and unexpectedly finds charm in the surrounding nature. Later, she has to climb a steep cliff and cross the ruins on her hoverboard. The last stop is a white sea of orchids, where Tally settles in for the night. Meanwhile, Dr. Cable calls Paris and offers to further enhance him. That night, Tally wakes up surrounded by burning orchids. As she is about to lose consciousness, David finds her. He checks her over, discards the transmitters he finds, ignoring the pendant, which is not yet active, and takes her with him. However, the tracker informs Dr. Cable that Tally is in the right place. In the morning, David brings Tally to the smoke, where she reunites with Shay. However, the others find it strange that she managed to get there alone. Tally expresses her concern for Shay and believes she should return, but Shay has no intention of doing so and asks Tally to take a closer look at this way of life. The next day, Tally comes across a group of young people preparing for an expedition. It turns out that the fires are set by them because the orchids are toxic and drain nutrients from the soil, killing the planet. David offers her to join them and see the truth. The group flies on a mission aboard an ancient modified helicopter. From above, they see fields and forests destroyed by the orchids. Shay sets the plants on fire and a blaze erupts, suddenly revealing figures of people walking through the fire unharmed. Suddenly, the helicopter shakes and Shay falls down. Tally immediately jumps after her. She finds her friend and grabs her just as she sees a figure in a blue suit running towards them. But Tally grabs onto a rope thrown down from the helicopter, and the two girls are pulled out of danger. Later, they discuss what happened, confused about how the city's scouts found them. Tally feels guilty and torn, as after getting to know the inhabitants of the smoke better, she has started to think differently. Here, everyone works but doesn't use money, they just trade. The elderly aren't a burden because they contribute in their own way. Most importantly, the people have chosen to be here. They melt down old iron and make useful things. When Tally asks about weapons, Shay simply shrugs, saying, "Why would we need them?" Tally joins in the work, and even though it's hard, she enjoys the process. In the evening, everyone gathers around the campfires where she is treated to natural foods. David tells the people that scouts have been spotted, meaning the city hasn't stopped pursuing them. While the smoke believes in controlling nature, the city has perfected controlling people. By focusing on appearance, people stop reading, learning, dreaming, and choosing who they want to become. That's why they are ready to defend their freedom. The next day, David teaches Tally how to shoot a bow, noticing the calluses on her hands, and gives her his gloves as a gift. At that moment, the flamethrowers arrive, having encountered scouts again. However, these are not typical beauties, but very fast and strong guys. Later, Shay notices the gloves and explains that in this world, things are different from the city. If a guy cares for a girl, it means she's important to him, so Tally has to make a choice. One day, Tally asks David about the weapons. He takes her to his parents. They reveal that they used to be plastic surgeons. It turns out these operations are not as safe as people believe. There were even fatalities. While studying these cases, David's father noticed changes in the brain of the beautiful, realizing that after the procedures, people's thinking became clouded and they experienced a false sense of happiness. But only Cable realized the secret was uncovered, and they were removed from their work and their research results were confiscated. It became clear that the brain was being intentionally damaged to control people. David's parents were lucky to find themselves in a community of dissenters where they were given a medicine that helped them stay sane. That's why they fled and dedicated the rest of their lives to creating a cure. But one of the main components remained in the city. The serum is the weapon, though it's not yet completed. Once they obtain what's missing, they will need to test it on a person, but only if that person agrees. That night, Tally reflects on everything she's learned, takes off the pendant, and throws it into the fire, not realizing that by doing so, she activates it. She tells David what happened, but he reassures her that she has chosen the right path. He tells her she is beautiful and kisses her. The next morning, the city attacks the smoke. Men in blue suits trap the residents of the smoke in nets and gather them in the square. Tally holds back David, and they watch the events unfold from a distance. Cable interrogates David's parents, and when she gets no answers, she orders Paris to kill David's father. He reaches out and with one swift movement, snaps the man's neck. David rushes out, and together with his mother, they cry over his father's body. Paris sees Tally but doesn't touch her, while Cable thanks her for her cooperation, revealing her true mission. As Shay expresses her disgust towards her, David's mother secretly slips a vial of the medicine into her son's pocket. Tally breaks free, runs to David's house, and sets it on fire. In the chaos, David escapes into the forest. Tally, shooting her pursuer with a bow, also runs while the townspeople burn down the settlement and take its residents away. Later, Tally finds David and tells him that she didn't know the whole truth, and the residents of the smoke paid the price. She is ready to help him get to the city and fix her mistake. She takes him to the school, introduces him to Shay's friends, and asks them for help. The young people start a rebellion, writing the words "Smoke Forever" above the city, diverting attention from the main goal. Taking advantage of this, Tally and David sneak into the laboratory. But to access the right level, the school ring is not enough. David takes it from a guard, and the pair find and free the residents of the smoke. But Shay has already been taken for the operation. Tally, David, and his mother rush after her, but it's too late. Shay has been turned into a beauty, and she really likes it. At that moment, Paris and Dr. Cable enter the laboratory, urging people to finally make a choice. All three step into the transformation booths, but just as the process begins, a helicopter flies overhead, and David's friend uses a flamethrower to melt the outer glass. The system collapses, Tally pulls Shay out, and while David's mother finds the necessary component for the medicine, they escape. The group makes it to the roof, where they are stopped by Paris. Tally tries to remind him of their friendship, but he reaches out, and David, remembering his father's death, attacks the handsome man. After a struggle, Paris dangles over a waterway, and at the last moment, he recognizes Tally, but he slips and falls down. David leads Tally away. Later, the group gathers in the ruins of the ancient city. David's mother shows them the retrieve component and pulls the vial from her son's pocket. The medicine is finally ready, but Shay refuses to be the test subject, as she loves being beautiful. So Tally volunteers to return to the city, undergo the procedure, and then become a volunteer. It's very risky, but she is confident in her strength. Sometime later, the beautiful Tally admires the city and, when asked by the system, assures it that she is completely happy being perfect. The movie raises more questions than it answers, The city's motivation is unclear, as the beauties produce nothing but self-admiration, and the danger posed by the smoke isn't fully explained, but the visuals allow viewers to simply enjoy the beautiful scenes, forgetting about the absurdities of the plot. A man wakes up in an unfamiliar place, not understanding where he is, how he got there, and where his phone is. He tries to reach out to someone, but a voice from behind the door advises him to be silent and calm down. An unseen interlocutor informs the man that he has been drugged, and he will feel very unwell for the next few days. But now, it's time for him to work, and he bids him farewell. Joe attempts to make sense of everything that has happened when he hears a small slot opening on the door, through which several food packets fall. Joe rushes to the door and asks the invisible guard for help. He has a pregnant wife at home who needs his assistance, so he needs to get out of here as soon as possible. He is told several times to step away from the door and not to reach his hand into the slot, but the man doesn't listen, resulting in a severe blow to his wrist. He cries, repeating that he doesn't deserve this and shouldn't be here. Later, Joe binds his wrist with his own tie and explores the strange place. He picks up the food and a small water bottle, but just as he's about to try the dubious meal, a siren starts blaring, followed by the voice of the Malord Corporation's AI welcoming him to a training program where he will become the best version of himself. Joe asks for information, but his neighbor advises him to keep quiet. His questions will remain unanswered anyway. A countdown to midnight begins, so Joe needs to prepare for his last hours of rest. The man doesn't understand what this means and tries to find out his interlocutor's name, but the interlocutor is surprised. Do they even have names here? The next minute, screams from people behind the walls start to reach Joe, telling him to be quiet and let them rest. The unseen interlocutor advises Joe to accept that this place is Malord, and now he should try to get some sleep because tomorrow will be the longest day of his life. Joe sits against the wall, when suddenly a melodic whistle is heard, followed by a man's voice begging not to do it and promising to exceed the plan tomorrow. However, he seems to be beaten and dragged away somewhere. Joe covers his ears to avoid hearing the unfortunate man's voice, and the AI's voice that reassures Joe that everything happening is meant to restore his peace of mind. Finally, the sun rises over the enclosure. The same whistle sounds, and a male voice congratulates Joe on the beautiful day and reminds him that the cameras must be kept clean. Otherwise, he will face punishment. At this time, the neighbor's voice speaks again, advising him to obey the orders and calling the nighttime incident a motivational speech to which he will soon become accustomed. Joe gathers some scarce trash and tosses it into a foul-smelling hole in the floor, covered by a small hatch, and there he notices something strange under his feet and, pulling on a strand, discovers that it's hair, beneath which a human's skull can be discerned. Joe screams in horror, but the neighbor knows that many people have died here, so Joe will have to get used to it. The neighbor reminds him of the contract he signed when he joined the company. Mallard gives this to everyone, but few read the fine print all the way to the end. So everything has its price. The sooner he gets into the rhythm, the easier his days will be. He just needs to do his work. At that moment, the AI voice kicks in. Joe interrupts it, shouting that he worked for the corporation for 10 years and demands to be released immediately, to which Mallord announces that a qualification enhancement seminar begins today. His productivity has declined recently, and now he has the opportunity to rectify it. Joe was once an exemplary employee, but he gradually stopped appreciating Mallord and everything she gave him. So now he has a new job that will last from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. During this time, he must turn the mill. 1 point for a complete rotation. His daily quota is 50 rotations. Do less, and he will be punished. But Mallard's motto is, enough is not good enough. He must strive to keep his position, salary, corporate apartment, and his life. Mallard wishes him success. Joe tries to persuade the AI to release him, but the neighbor advises not to waste his strength. At the moment, he needs to survive, and for that, he must work. And Joe gets to work. At first, it's very difficult for him, but he pushes through, and it starts to move. Mallard congratulates him on his first rotation, suggesting a virtual toast for his first victory. Joe pushes the mill, listening to the corporation's advertisements. Finally, the signal for the end of the work sounds, and Mallard congratulates him on completing his first day of self-improvement work. He exceeded the quota, which is very good. At night, Joe hears women's screams as Mallard announces another dismissal. Later, the neighbor, learning that Joe doubled the quota, advises him not to maintain such a pace. Joe can't understand the point. If he doesn't meet the quota, he's punished, but if he exceeds it and is last among all, it means death. To which the neighbor advises not to tell everyone about his quota. They're not friends, and the neighbor will always try to outdo him. They all have one thing in common. They climbed the corporate ladder, receiving many bonuses from the company, and seemingly reached the top. But, alas. Suddenly, Joe starts talking about his wife and the future son they had long awaited. And now, he's here. To which the neighbor advises him to work as well as he can. It's the only way to survive here, but overdoing it is not an option. A new workday begins. Joe pushes the mill and remembers how he and his wife inspected their new home, and he promised to work even harder to pay for it. The workday ends when there's a knock on Joe's door, and he's ordered to remove all of his clothes. He becomes scared but complies. After undressing, he steps out of the door and finds himself under a stream of water. After quickly washing himself, he returns to his chamber. The next day arrives, and the weather outside is significantly hotter, causing Joe to quickly become exhausted. He asks his neighbor what this mill is and what they are all doing here. The neighbor responds that they produce nothing, so the place is empty of purpose or meaning. Soon, Joe runs out of water and tries to call out to the guard, but the guard advises him to collect his urine and drink it, filtered through his sneakers. Joe is absolutely reluctant to do so, and the invisible interlocutor laughs at him, saying that Malord knows what he needs. Here, he will be pushed to his limits, and Malord wants to see how far he can go before breaking. Joe continues to work, recalling how his wife doubted his ability to pay all the bills, and he promised that their child would have a better life. That evening, Malord notes Joe's growing self-awareness. Suddenly, he sees a name carved out: Alex. Later, he asks the neighbor who Alex is, and the neighbor calls him a legend who managed to escape from here. The next morning, Malord thanks him for his diligence and gives him a personalized pen. Then she displays a new daily quota, 370 laps. Joe is horrified and expresses his frustration in the rudest way. The AI explains that people don't always realize their strengths. It's tough, but this is how the world changes. A signal sounds, and Joe starts pushing the mill. Suddenly, he notices that the counter doesn't mark the laps. Instead, a cross appears, indicating punishment. 1 cross equals 2 laps, and it continues geometrically. Then, the person gives up, but Joe is not planning to do that. With all his strength, he pushes the mill. However, his strength leaves him. When the neighbor learns the number of laps assigned to him, he becomes furious. Joe exceeded the unattainable number of laps, argued with Malord, and now, all of them, will suffer. Malord then announces that he failed to meet the quota and disappointed his colleagues. Taking care of them is the company's main principle, so he will have a new colleague, Kate Stevens. Joe is horrified when he sees his wife's face on the screen and promises to exceed any plan just to keep her from being here. Malord gives him 1 day and activates a massive glowing screen above his compartment, not allowing him to rest. A new workday begins, and Joe starts pushing his mill under Malord's wishes for a productive day. Suddenly, he sees himself in front of him, a second Joe mocking his hopes. He worked his whole life, hoping his efforts would pay off, but now he's failed and should give up. However, Joe stubbornly continues pushing the mill, and at exactly 10 he completes 370 laps. Malord congratulates him on this and cancels the penalty. As motivation, they show him images of his wife with a baby in her arms. Joe cries tears of joy, but immediately afterward, tears of sorrow as he missed his son's birth. In the morning, he asks his neighbor to tell him everything he knows about this place. The neighbor recalls his son, whom he saw only in his childhood because his father was always at work. He advises Joe to investigate the blind spot. Joe rushes to the wall and, after a long contemplation, finds an erase spot. Remembering the gifted pen, he uses it to puncture the wall and slightly expand the recess overnight. But a new day dawns and Joe begins pushing the mill, and at night, he again chips away at the wall. This continues for many days and nights. Eventually, he manages to create a hole he can crawl through. Joe crawls through it, but ends up in complete darkness, where suddenly a person appears, hits him on the head, and wishes him sweet dreams. Joe regains consciousness in his chamber. The hole is sealed, and the AI voice sounds once more. My lord is disappointed but still willing to give him one last chance. He's so fixated on his desires that he doesn't see the big picture. So his neighbor was punished, and his quota has been increased to 1,000 laps per day. Joe rushes to the wall and learns that his neighbor's leg is broken and he won't be able to complete even a single lap. Afterward, the man confesses that they are being controlled by a computer he created himself. The first algorithm he wrote self-improved and created the second, and so on. Now people don't know how it works. Then Joe has an epiphany. If they don't work, everyone's score will drop to 0. And what will the algorithm do then? Joe shouts to the others, telling them about his discovery. People respond, supporting his proposal to stop working. But the workday begins, and everyone starts pushing their mills because they are afraid of dying. Joe tries to persuade his neighbors, but realizing the futility, he cries and picks up the pen. In the evening, he talks with his neighbor, and the neighbor reveals his name, Alex. He also managed to escape from his chamber but was brought back, just like Joe, so getting out of here is impossible. At night, Joe hears that Malord has taken away Alex. In the morning, the AI wakes him up and, to boost his spirits, shows him images of his wife and their walking baby. Joe is horrified. He can't be here for so long. He shouts insults at Mallard and he's fired. Immediately, the doors open and a crowd of clerks enters, positioning themselves on the sides and silently watching Joe as he thrashes among them, trying to get an answer. But then, a man in uniform enters and confesses that he enjoys firings. 12 clerks witnessed each of them. The man loads a syringe and laments Joe's ingratitude when Mallord gave him the whole world. The man hopes to soon have a house available on one of the streets where a single mother with a young son lives. And at that moment, Joe loses control and starts beating him. Mallard announces a security guard's failed mission and his impending firing, while Joe, on the contrary, will be promoted. The man stops, feeling blood on his hands, but the battered guard asks him to continue. And then Joe stands up and shouts that he is not a monster, and he leaves. And right away, Joe finds himself in an office where several employees are sitting, and his interlocutor congratulates him on passing the career advancement simulator. It all happened within an hour, and his son hasn't been born yet. He struggled with middle-level managers but got stuck on the 8th level. Malord realized that he was too good. His productivity increased, his personal qualities improved, and the coup he organized exceeded all expectations. He's a non-conventional thinking leader. Joe takes off the suction cups from himself, but his interlocutor doesn't pay attention and invites him to see his new office. In Malord, there are numerous positions, and you can climb to the top for years. Soon the pair reaches the desired floor, but Joe keeps thinking about the time spent in the simulation. Here's the office with new gadgets. Joe also expects a salary increase and other perks. There's a contract on the table stating that disclosing what he experienced in the simulation will lead to immediate termination. Joe signs it and receives assurances that Mallord is his company forever. The man sits down at the table, looks at a photo of his wife, and calls Kate. She's surprised, and the man can barely hold back tears, recalling his long, eventful day. After catching his breath a bit, he promises to burn this damned place. The movie is presented as a science fiction film, but behind every word or action of the hero, the reality of the modern corporate system is clearly revealed. The blatant exploitation of people, causing them to start living to work, rather than working to live. A young man returns home and discovers on the carpet in the living room his own body. Next to it lies an envelope with the inscription, "Look at me." The initial shock is replaced by curiosity as Alex finds a flash drive in the envelope, which he immediately plugs into his computer and on the screen sees just himself. The second, Alex reassures himself he is not high and has not gone insane and advises to listen carefully. Thus, it all started with men in black coming to his house. Rebecca, an employee of a private scientific research institute of advanced technologies which cooperates with the National Security Agency of the USA, has a very tempting offer for Alex. But first, Alex must sign non-disclosure agreement, for which Rebecca offers a check for a substantial amount. Having signed the papers, Alex learns the story of an American unregistered satellite which the USA did not launch. Strangely enough to admit, the satellite is allegedly from the future and contains a coded message inside. If Alex agrees, he will be put to sleep and delivered to the laboratory. The institute knows that he is practically bankrupt and lives in a house inherited from his parents. To prove the seriousness of her intentions, Rebecca immediately transfers a large sum to Alex's account, which convinces him to sign the documents. The next day, he is put in a car, given an injection, after which he falls asleep and only comes to his senses in a closed, secret place. Rebecca shows him the laboratory where the satellite is already located. And the guy starts solving the task. 5 weeks pass, but there are no results yet. Rebecca suggests Alex take a day off, but the guy does not need it. One day, he is visited by a vision in which a young woman decodes the same task. After that, Alex bleeds from his nose. Later, he finds the name of this woman written on the frame of the bed. Soon, Alex manages to decrypt part of the code, which contains drawings of an unknown device. Rebecca announces the end of his work and informs him that he will be taken home. Alex comes to his senses at home late at night. He feels ill, which he attributes to fatigue and stress. But after a few days, the malaise intensified, and he began to be haunted by persistent hallucinations. And one day, 2 strange-looking men appear on the threshold of his house, wanting to know why he agreed to decrypt the code. Alex does not understand because decryption is just his job, which pays well. The men continue to press Alex with questions about morality. Don't the consequences of his work bother him, since the device to be created from the decrypted drawings will be the most powerful weapon in the world? Alex's head starts to hurt, and he asks the men to leave. They thank him for the answers and leave. Alex immediately feels better and sits down at the computer, but at that moment, a call comes from Rebecca, reminding him of the signed non-disclosure agreements. An indignant Alex realizes that the institute is watching him, and when he again sits down at the computer in his house, the lights go out. Alex goes outside and suddenly sees one of the 2 men who came to him with questions on the opposite side of the street, but the man's body starts growing before his eyes. Frightened, Alex runs home and looks out the window to see the giant's hand reaching for his window. Alex extends his hand to meet it, and morning comes. Rebecca, who has arrived, finds Alex at work. He tries to explain that humanity lives in 2-dimensional space, and his recent guests are a highly developed civilization that exists not only in space but also in time. They can be in this room but earlier or later, and they can watch what is happening through some kind of window in time. Alex tries to convey to Rebecca the danger of the device they are building, which can start World War III. Then the woman informs him that she knows about his illness, a brain tumor. The guy blames the institute, which placed him in a room with a radioactive satellite, causing a tumor to develop in his brain, and insists on stopping the construction of the device. Alex, in the present, pulls his dead body out of the house and buries it in the forest, then returns to the computer and continues to listen to the story from his future self. Alex, in the future, regrets that they did not want to listen to him because he understood that something ominous was coming. Then he remembers the woman. She is cryptographer. Alex finds her address, but Beth refuses to talk to him. Alex shouts that he is dying. He has 6 months left. After that, Beth opens the doors and informs that she has 2 years left. She also realized that it was a weapon, and the drawing supposedly came from the future. There is another person, Schieferman, who communicates with her through the computer and sends her tasks, which she solves when she feels normal. Beth starts feeling unwell, so a man takes her to the bedroom, while he goes downstairs, where it seems like he sees the girl's life in the mirrors. There she is, saying goodbye to her beloved in military uniform. There his comrades inform her of terrible news, and there she is with a handful of pills in her hand, trying to leave this life. But then his attention is captured by a message from Schieferman appearing on the computer monitor. Alex responds, but Schieferman quickly realizes that it's not Beth and disconnects. The man then grabs a pack of printed papers with tasks previously given by Schieferman. In the morning, Beth finds him on her sofa, with the papers glued together. The guy points out to her that all this are pieces of a puzzle which, when assembled, can give an answer. Schieferman clearly doesn't work at the institute. Alex asks Beth to help stop the creation of a death machine. The girl reports that she fell ill specifically after working with the satellite. She started having hallucinations and began thinking about a message from the future. What if it's possible to contact the sender? She began to hear the voices of the dead and one day heard her own voice. She also saw aliens, though she doesn't believe in them, and asks Alex to leave. Alex goes home, where people in black are waiting for him. Rebecca orders him not to meet with Beth anymore and urges him to use the remaining time wisely. Angered, the guy sends the guests to hell, and upon entering the house discovers that all his papers with conclusions have disappeared. Meanwhile, Beth sees a bright light at her house, which makes her feel sick. The woman screams in fear and tries to hide. Alex tries to drown his thoughts in alcohol when a message from Schefferman arrives on his computer. The guy is sure that Rebecca is hiding behind this nickname, but the interlocutor denies it. At that moment, the doorbell rings. Beth is on the threshold. It turns out that Schefferman directed Beth here and sent her the blueprints of a device capable of destroying the technology from the future. The couple begins developing a virus capable of destroying the machine being created from the blueprints they decrypted through the computer. But the next morning, Rebecca bursts into Alex's house. Representatives of the Institute know about their work and are already on their way there. She gives the name of the Institute's founder and orders to go to him as soon as possible. She is Schefferman and hope to destroy the device with their help. Then cars approach Alex's house. The couple escapes through the back exit. Rebecca is caught, given an injection, and thrown into a car. Meanwhile, all the gas burners in the kitchen are opened. In the evening, Alex and Beth arrive at scientist Miles, who immediately recognizes both of them, as he has always followed their work. The thing is, this satellite was not the only one. There was another, which orbited Earth for about 400 years. Apparently, unknown beings from the future were waiting for Earthlings to grow up, fly into space, and be able to decrypt their message. The ancient satellite also contained blueprints of a machine whose purpose was to limit the evolution of humanity within the third dimension. But when Miles announced his discovery, he was laughed at. He also developed a tumor, luckily not fatal. He is sure that aliens are capable of existing in several dimensions. They do not perceive time in a linear form as humans do. And the second device, which is now being created at the Institute, will likely provide them access to the human dimension. So far, they are like watching a videotape where humans are movie characters. With the help of the first device, they can watch this movie but cannot change what is happening. But the second will allow changing the existing reality. Miles is just beginning to understand the essence of this process, but cannot explain everything completely. After all, even the appearance of the aliens is formed by the human brain itself. And by the way, he has been in contact with a huge alien visible only to him, living in his garden for more than 30 years. Miles constantly looks at it, causing his brain to adapt and begin to see the true appearance of the humanoid. But his guests see no one. Miles is sure that the tumor in their heads is the aliens' help so that people could perceive their reality. Alex suggests simply smashing the device with a hammer, but where is the guarantee that they will not restore it in the Institute? So all data on the server needs to be erased, although no one even knows the location of the Institute. But Miles reminds that he is one of its founders, and he pulls out a map with a detailed plan of the Institute. At that moment, a loud bang is heard at the door. The couple runs away, while Miles tries to calm down the raging alien. Alex and Beth hit the road and soon find the Institute's building, where they open a hatch through which they sneak inside. There they separate to increase the chances of finding the laboratory. Alex witnesses the strange behavior of a guard who constantly returns backward and realizes that time inside the Institute is looped. Beth also falls into this loop. Realizing the futility of her attempts to go further, the girl activates the bomb. But because of the time loop, she is unable to leave the dangerous place. Alex goes into a dark room and tries to carry the bomb further when he is overtaken by an alien and literally disintegrates the man into small particles. A minute later, Alex finds himself tied to a table. Opposite him sits a humanoid. Alex thinks he has died, but the alien denies his belief. They are simply curious about the human appearance and their experience of time. Linear time for aliens is incomprehensible and tedious, a labor-intensive cycle of empty beliefs. Humans are like in a trap, forced to constantly go through the same thing. Aliens, on the other hand, exist outside of time and space. They are in every moment. Therefore, causal connection and sequence of actions for them is a mystery. What will happen if a human no longer has to wait for something? Alex realizes humans will become similar to the appearance of aliens, but the familiar personality, the ego, dies in the moment. The alien is surprised. Death is natural, but man hides and distances himself from it. Time determines everything for a human. It is both a giver and a thief. A human sees the world as he imagined it, and what will happen when the source of projection disappears. Even with the eternity of self-analysis, man will not understand the difference between reality and illusion. With each newly born, a new reality comes. Therefore, a person always stands before choice. Alex feels very bad, and then the alien offers to return to the moment before the guy got sick, with the information he now has. Alex decides that he would not have gone to work at the institute and would have stopped all this. The alien is surprised. Why would he change his behavior if he's not able to change the situation? And then Alex admits, people do not choose what will happen. The humanoid insists, will his return to the past make a difference? Can something change? And immediately, the guy finds himself in his home, in front of the computer. He records this flash drive, realizing that nothing can be changed. The world may disappear tomorrow, but this is not news. Everything has already happened. Everything ended before it began. He puts the flash drive in an envelope and falls to the floor. The last words on the flash drive are about Alex in the past, warning Beth, and he drives to the girl's house, while Alex from the future, in his last words, asks to forget about everything and live on. Quite an interesting movie that makes you think, what if the concept of time really does not exist, and we live only here and now in one single moment? Who made us believe that there is a past and a future? And is it true that a person does foolish things, not thinking about how his thoughts and actions change his own future? Friends, write your opinion in the comments. In 2025, aliens occupy Earth and first enclose cities with 300-meter walls to limit human movement. Welcome to day 348 of our occupation. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. One day, truck driver Will bids farewell to his wife Katie and their children, Grace and Bram, and drives to work through the streets of Los Angeles, patrolled by soldiers in red helmets. Later, from his conversation with a colleague, it becomes clear that Will is planning an illegal trip beyond the wall. He reaches a smuggler who places him in a metal box and covers it with ice. That's when Will discovers he has a fellow passenger, to whom he reveals he's looking for his 12-year-old son left behind the wall. Soon the vehicle enters through the gates, then an explosion occurs, flipping the truck over. Dazed, Will crawls out only to be captured by the red helmets. That same morning, Katie goes to an underground dealer for forbidden insulin. By restricting medicine, the invaders weed out the weak, making it very hard to obtain. She presents a bottle of alcohol for trade, but finds the insulin spoiled. She has to fight her way out with a pistol, risking drone detection and death for all. But Katie can't afford to be robbed. Meanwhile, Will is imprisoned, unable to call his wife. Katie is indeed worried, as walking the streets at night is prohibited. Then her sister Maddie arrives with her son, who needs the insulin. Katie assures she will find the medication and asks to stay with the children. She goes to her husband's colleague, who lies about not knowing Will's whereabouts. Katie has to return home empty-handed. Suddenly an alarm blares over the city. Katie hides under a military truck parked at the curb. A drone hovers above just as a prisoner is shoved into the vehicle. Just when Katie seems doomed, the truck starts moving and the drone flies away. The woman makes it home. In the morning, she visits her friend Broussard and reports Will's disappearance. It turns out he, like her husband, was with the FBI before the aliens arrived. He asked her to return home while he checks his remaining contacts, but Katie goes to the hospital, where she learns of the explosion at the city's entrance. Amidst the chaos, she sneaks into a storeroom and steals several vials of insulin. In prison, Will hears his cellmate's confessions, soon to be sent to work at a factory for the aliens. Then soldiers arrive, one shouting Will's real surname. He's recognized and taken to the Green Zone, where the world's leaders now reside. There, he's met by Snyder, a representative of the Los Angeles governor. Snyder knows Will's military and FBI background and his knack for catching dangerous criminals. Since the military and police vanished after the aliens' arrival, Will had to hide, but now Snyder needs his help, offering his family full protection in return. The Masters demand security, so Will lead a special unit, infiltrate the rebels, and capture their leader Geronimo. As the alien spacecraft is about to launch, Snyder takes Will to the balcony, hoping to persuade him to switch sides. If he refuses, his family will be sent to the factory. At night, the red helmets bring Will home, frightening his family, but he reassures them, explaining he was just in an accident. However, Katie realizes her husband is lying. Hearing he went to look for Charlie, she cries, but the news of Snyder's proposal enrages her. She would never become the wife of a traitor. In the morning, the family is woken up by the smell of bacon, and upon entering the kitchen, they find Snyder there. He has prepared breakfast and even brewed coffee, which is now impossible to find. As he eats, he lists all the benefits of their new status: security, a personal tutor for the children, good food and work. Moreover, the aliens allow the couple to reopen their old bar. However, Will is only willing to agree in exchange for the return of his son, who is in another block. Snyder promises to consider this option. The next morning, Katie arrives at an unassuming house where members of the resistance, whom she informs that the occupiers have hired her husband to find them, await her. The following morning, Will goes to work, quickly realizing that Snyder deceived him. Instead of becoming the commander of a special unit, he is subordinated to Phyllis, who assigns him to find the guy who planted an explosive device at the city entrance. He is partnered with Bo, an old policeman. Meanwhile, Katie arrives at her bar and finds her lost son's belongings. Broussard interrupts her cleaning, wanting to know what the police have found out about the explosion at the customs, but Will has just started his job and has no information yet. Meanwhile, Will and Bo approach the house where the girlfriend of the wanted criminal lives, and by deception, they force him to run out the back door. The agent catches up with him when suddenly a drone appears. Will fearlessly looks directly into the lens, and it instantly disappears. The police bring the detainee to the station, where Will's arrested colleague is found. The man begs Phyllis to release him as his informant, but she refuses. Then Will goes to his trailer, but his family is no longer there because the woman and child are entering his house at that moment. After hiding the mother and son upstairs, Katie drives to Broussard as the couple needs new documents, but he refuses to help, as the resistance cannot take risks. Katie leaves. At home, she confronts Will, who, learning that his friend's family is with him, takes them to a man who makes fake documents. On their way, they are stopped by the Red Helmets. However, after checking the pass, they let him go with apologies, leaving Katie in a state of shock. They safely arrive at the Masters, and while he makes the documents, Will tells Katie that he caught the guy who planted the bomb. And once he finds Geronimo, they will be able to bring Charlie back. Later, Will takes the woman and child to a camp where displaced people live. Katie meets with the resistance leader. Alexander calms her down, as the caught boy belongs to another group, but he promises to warn them. At the station, Will discovers that a group of prisoners is being prepared for shipment to the factory. Phyllis asks him to resign himself. During the arrival, the city's entire defense was destroyed in 8 hours. What can a bunch of rebels do? At night, Katie comforts her distraught husband when he is informed that the suspect has divulged the location of his accomplice's hideout. He leaves, and Katie rushes to the phone to warn Broussard. Meanwhile, the prisoners are brought to the location, forced to strip, disinfected, and then redressed. At the same time, the Red Helmets arrive at the location named by the detainee and find only the bodies of rebels. Will realizes that there is a spy among the police. The next morning, a man with a card enters an inconspicuous house on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Immediately, a radio broadcast begins with calls to overthrow the occupation, voiced by Geronimo. The Red Helmets detect the transmission and head to the location. At the same time, Bram duplicates the broadcast recording and hides the cassettes under the bed, but the military, storming into the house, find no one there. That same day, Katie participates in a resistance armed attack on a food truck for the first time. During the operation, one of their comrades, Kim, is fatally wounded. Katie tries to help him, but Broussard finishes the boy off, shocking Katie. Then, drones arrive and start shooting random passers-by. However, Broussard calculates the authorities' response time to the incident. After the operation, Katie rushes home and barely manages to wash off the blood traces. She is so shaken that she doesn't want to explain anything and locks herself in her room. That day at school, Bram gives a cassette to his teacher, who notices a change in the pattern of the alien ship's takeoffs. He saw a very large object circling Earth in the sky and now intends to make a more powerful telescope. The police arrive at the scene of the incident. Will notices the body of a boy who was clearly finished off. Phyllis orders to take his photo and quickly learns his name. After that, the Red Helmets go to his house and arrest his parents. Will is outraged by this and fails to notice Broussard in the crowd, who heads to the resistance base and reports what happened. But Alexander is confident that Kim left no traces. Will then goes home, where Katie explains her morning behavior with the things found in the bar belonging to their son. Distraught, Will blames himself for being powerless against the Masters, but his wife promises her support. Later, Katie goes to meet Broussard. He justifies his actions as saving Kim from torture, but now she needs to extract everything her husband learned during the investigation from him. At the same time, Bram's friend asks for his help and leads the boy to an underground tunnel beneath the wall, where her brother slipped and injured his leg. It turns out their father worked there before the arrival, and now they use the tunnel to get beyond the wall. Will and Bo go to a cultural center, listed among the places visited by the deceased Kim, and find a rebel weapons cache. At the same time, Bram's friends tell him they've been going to the other side for 6 months to get food, as there's no one beyond the wall. Alexander learns about the lost weapons and asks Broussard to warn Katie about the inadmissibility of her husband's actions. He fulfills this request, but Katie is more concerned about her family's safety. Nevertheless, in the evening, she opens the bar to visitors. Suddenly, in the midst of the festivities, Snyder walks in. The man congratulates everyone on the opening of the establishment and then explains to Will that by revitalizing such places, the masters allow people to safely release tension. Hearing this, Katie becomes furious, thinking they've sold out to the aliens for the sake of getting their son back. But Will is convinced that by continuing to work for Snyder, he will be able to find Charlie. Later, he speaks with Bo again about the spy. However, the former policeman, who has faced betrayal, doesn't believe in such a possibility. Meanwhile, Katie tells Broussard that the quick finding of the Resistance's premises is explained by a huge database in a woman who knows how to use it. She's ready to reveal her name if Will remains unharmed. Broussard swears to this. The next day, a squad of red helmets bursts into the school. The military brutally arrest a teacher and beat a student. Returning to the base, one of them removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Broussard. Later, he explains to Alexander that he learned the duty schedule of the red helmets. Now they have a chance to be in the right place at the right time. That same day, Phyllis shows Will information about the Los Angeles rebels. If they unite and go on the offensive, the entire block will be cleaned out. She hopes Will understands what this means for him and his family and counts on his loyalty. Meanwhile, Katie takes the children for a walk with Lindsay, the governess appointed by the authorities, and turns on the streetlight, sending a prearranged signal. The sound of breaking glass is heard. The woman counts to 10, then pulls out a fire extinguisher. Only after extinguishing the fire does she call emergency services. The red helmets and Will arrive. He is outraged to find that his house is being searched, but such is the protocol. Katie is asked to go to Phyllis for interrogation. She promises the family enhanced security. Moreover, the neighbors are warned that if something happens to them, they will be held responsible. Katie is shocked, as now they will be feared. Phyllis interrogates her about everything, even the personal relationship between husband and wife. Meanwhile, Maddie goes to the Commission for the Preservation of Cultural and Artistic Items in search of work and introduces herself to Charlotte, the director, hoping to become her assistant. After his wife's interrogation, Will confronts Phyllis, but she shows him tapes found under Bram's bed and advises him to keep a closer eye on his son. For now, she'll hold on to these pieces of evidence. Furious, Will drives home, and after a tough conversation, Bram shows his father posters. Their appearance in the city signals the release of a new broadcast by Geronimo. Katie manages to extract a promise from Alexander not to touch her husband, and in return identifies her husband's boss, Phyllis, in a photo. Later, another broadcast by Geronimo begins in the city. This time, the police immediately detect the signal coming from the library and rush there. The man hears their approach but utters his final words, calling for resistance. He is arrested, although Will is sure it's not Geronimo, greatly disappointing Snyder, who had already informed the masters of their victory. That same day, Maddie witnesses Charlotte's anger, who needs a painting by a specific artist. Maddie reports she knows who had collections in the city, as she worked as an art historian. Meanwhile, the arrested man confesses during interrogation that he found the text for the broadcast in a pipe. The police go to the site and verify that the indicated pipe leads to the green zone. Charlotte's workers find art items in the house Maddie mentioned. In gratitude, the owner takes her on board and promises to help with insulin. That same day, Phyllis informs Will that as a sign of trust, she destroyed the tapes. The man goes home where Bram admits he listened to Geronimo because he was the only one who instilled hope in people. Katie arrives at the bar earlier than usual and finds Phyllis in the hall, who wants to talk to her alone. Phyllis talks about her husband and draws parallels with Will, who loves his wife so much that he doesn't see who she really is. She shows surveillance photos from the truck attack site and warns Katie that she's gotten involved with the wrong people. If Katie wants to survive, she will now work for her. After the conversation, Phyllis returns home, where her paralyzed husband lies. She greets him, but upon entering the living room, she finds Broussard there. Phyllis immediately understands why he came and asks him to kill her husband too. Broussard shoots. The next day, Beau and Will go to the crime scene and find the word Geronimo written on the wall. Snyder is furious because Phyllis was very close to the masters and demands the criminal be found. A message comes in about the capture of one of the Geronimo group. Will interrogates the young man, who gives an address in the green zone. The red helmets burst in there, finding a concealed room and several people who call themselves the Geronimo group. Meanwhile, Bram, accompanied by his girlfriend, passes under the wall and ends up in a deserted city where they find necessary supplies in a huge warehouse. Back in Los Angeles, news is broadcast that the underground has been eliminated, although Will doesn't believe it. Snyder once again becomes enraged because he sees that the captured couple doesn't look like terrorists. He refuses to fulfill the agreement about searching for Charlie and appoints Will as the head of the group. Will immediately begins searching for the mole, and Phyllis's assistant, Jennifer, reminds him of his wife, suggesting he might be the source of the leak. Returning home, Will sees Bram giving his sister markers brought from beyond the wall, but the son lies that he traded them for oranges. Snyder interrogates a man who claimed to be Geronimo, but he confesses that he is just an actor. Snyder convinces him to play out his role in exchange for being sent to another block. At the same time, Bram rushes to his teacher and promises to get him a powerful lens for his telescope. Will, secretly from his wife, searches the bar but finds nothing incriminating except for a book he doesn't recognize. The trial of Geronimo is broadcast on all channels, featuring relatives of the terrorism victims, and a scaffold for execution is erected in the square. The actor plays his role, believing Snyder's promises to eradicate terrorism. He realizes he's been deceived only when he finds himself on the scaffold, but can do nothing about it. Immediately after the execution, Snyder invites Will to join him, promising to show him something unusual. At the same time, Alexander's group prepares for a new attack, with Katie among the rebels. On the way, Will expresses his outrage to Snyder, who achieved nothing by executing the actor, but Snyder reminds him of the need to pacify the population and that he's bought time to search for the real Geronimo. Snyder's car moves through the city, guarded by a group of red helmets, including Broussard. At one of the turns, a decoy road worker sends them on a detour, and when the convoy slows down, Broussard shoots his colleagues. Snyder tries to run, but Will locks the doors as the car is armored. Rebels, disguised in red helmets uniforms, shoot at the car and manage to pull the door off, but Will shoots from inside and still gets Snyder out of the fire. Drones appear, but the rebels manage to escape. Will leads Snyder into the bar where Katie arrives at the same time. Snyder is hysterical, but Will cannot guarantee protection by his own means. Katie asks Will in private not to risk himself for such a worthless person, but Will cannot leave a person without help. Realizing that the phone doesn't work, he goes outside to a payphone to call for backup. Meanwhile, Alexander, learning about Will's role in saving Snyder, is furious, but then Katie communicates via radio that the traitor is in the bar. She returns to Snyder and keeps the conversation going to lower his guard. He boasts about being a professor of economics, which earned him a high position. He mentions there are 7 more colonies, but he doesn't know what happens beyond them. Will returns, announcing that he has managed to call for reinforcement and it's on its way. Katie bandages Will's wound, and he confesses that Geronimo is a collective image, not one person. Katie asks not to interfere with Snyder's killing, but Will reminds her that another will take his place. Then, Snyder reveals that his people have found their son, and he is currently negotiating Charlie's return. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. They hide Snyder in the bathroom. Broussard enters in a red helmet's uniform and searches the place. Katie leads him to the basement, asking to ensure Will's safety, but he can't guarantee anything as her husband is always diving into the fray. Broussard eventually leaves, but Will is sure he is a member of the resistance and will return with backup. They barricade the doors with Snyder, who again mentions Charlie, infuriating Katie as she's tired of his blackmail. Meanwhile, the rebels try to break into the bar, but fail. A frightened Snyder tells Will that the masters have tested virtually every person, thus filtering out those they don't need, but he has never seen the aliens himself. As the rebels continue to press, Will orders Katie to hide, readying himself to defend Snyder. Then a smoke grenade is thrown in, the militants storm in. Will opens fire. When one of the rebels finds Will, Katie shoots him, but Broussard aims at her and her husband forces her to drop the weapon. The rebel herds them into the basement and leaves. However, Will finds a machine gun and chases after him, but by the time he gets upstairs everyone is gone. Then, the real red helmets arrive and pull Snyder from the closet where Will had hidden him. In the evening, Will tries to reassure Katie, explaining that Snyder's tribunal was just a farce. There is no people's hero, and those who attacked them have no relation to Geronimo. Meanwhile, Alexander concludes that Katie is a double agent, simply leading them on. Meanwhile, Maddie starts a relationship with Charlotte's husband, Nolan, who is the leader of the New Age preacher church. At the same time, Will identifies Broussard by photo, having seen him among the attackers, and receives an order to find and arrest him. The Red Helmets head to his address, but when they begin to storm the house, it explodes. Will questions Broussard's squadmates, and one mentions a distinctive feature, a tattoo on the chest, which Will recognizes as a Special Forces sign. Broussard infiltrates a restricted area, where he steals the corpse of a dark-skinned man of similar age and build. Along with Alexander, they place it in a car and burn it. Throughout, the leader convinces Broussard of Katie's betrayal. Later, the police find a burnt car with a charred body inside, matching the description of the bar attacker, but Will once again doubts everything. Katie tries to contact the underground, but can't manage to do so. Finally, she finds an encrypted message with the name of a meeting place, where a car with Broussard at the wheel awaits her. Meanwhile, Will's assistant Jennifer finds in the database 14 people with Broussard's face, and he realizes that Broussard is not just a military man, but a former FBI agent. Broussard takes Kate out of the city and asks her difficult questions, as she shot one of her own, but Katie reminds him that she laid out one main condition from the start: her family must be untouchable. She joined the fight and served the cause faithfully. He doubts her loyalty. She leaves, unwilling to continue the conversation. Broussard goes to one of the resistance members, Rachel, and tells her about Alexander's order to eliminate Katie and how he couldn't go through with it. Will arrives at Snyder's in the Green Zone and reports that Broussard is called something entirely different, and he's very skilled in his field, but he'll definitely find him. In response, Snyder gives him an envelope containing a recent photo of Charlie. Will brings it to Katie, and through tears she asks her husband to rid themselves of Snyder's control. He promises to do so when he is ready. Meanwhile, Charlotte learns about Maddie and Nolan's relationship and threatens to fire her. Nolan decides to remind his wife of her place and offers Maddie to become his assistant. The police receive new information, with which Will goes home. He shows his wife a photo of Broussard and tells her that his fingerprints were found in their bar. This means he was there before. Katie says she doesn't know him, but Will shows her photos of his victims, and she recalls that he indeed visited them and said he lived in his mother's house and was fixing it. Jennifer immediately finds Broussard's mother's house through receipts from construction stores. Rachel comes to Katie, confessing that Broussard indeed killed many, but it's part of the resistance. Katie reminds her that she almost became one of his victims, but Rachel reminds her that Broussard didn't carry out that order. Then Katie calls Broussard and warns him that Will has figured him out. The Red Helmets go to Broussard's mother's house, but it's empty. The abandoned tools make it clear he received a warning. Will calls out to a neighbor who turns out to be Alexander, and he says he hasn't seen his neighbor. Will leaves but then stops. On Broussard's table lies the same book as in his wife's bar. Will's partner ends up at a factory where people often get sick and die. It turns out the factories are built on the moon. Will shows his children a photo of Charlie and admits he only started working for the government to get him back. That morning, the governor of the Los Angeles block arrives at Snyder's to inform him that the chief minister of the Pacific region is coming for an inspection. He assures everything is going well, but the woman is very doubtful. Katie goes to Rachel and learns that her underage sons are also in the resistance. She is stunned by the woman's courage, but still announces her departure from the group, fearing for her family. Rachel promises her support. Alexander calls Will and declares that his wife is the mole leaking information to the rebels. He sets up a meeting place. Will goes there. He immediately recognizes Broussard's neighbor, who confesses that he is the head of the cell and is willing to betray everyone for the right to leave the block. Meanwhile, Broussard meets with the leader of the youth cell of the rebels, from whom he receives information about the arrival of an important person. Will returns to Beau and tells him everything. Later he goes to Snyder and conveys Alexander's conditions. Snyder demands a personal meeting. In the evening, Katie returns to the topic of Charlie. If Snyder knows where he is, why can't he bring him back? But the conversation shifts to the meeting with Alexander. He reveals he is ready to betray the entire cell, and Katie immediately leaves for the bar, signaling Broussard along the way. Bram and his teacher observe the moon and notice changes in its surface. It seems that's where the alien mines and warehouses are located. That evening, Broussard comes to the bar, where Katie tells him about the leader's betrayal. He immediately goes to Alexander and starts asking questions, but Alexander demands he stop all communication with Katie and prepares for a new operation. The next day, Will takes Snyder to the meeting place with Alexander, who confesses he just wants to survive. He needs a universal pass to travel between blocks. In exchange, he gives a list of the group led by Broussard and admits they are planning an operation to eliminate the minister. He will set up a meeting for Broussard where the police will arrest him. Afterward, Will take him beyond the wall and give him the pass. Later, Broussard arrives at the designated place in the market. Rachel and Katie are also there, and upon spotting the red helmets, Katie immediately warns Broussard. A rebel throws firecrackers, causing panic, and people scatter as the military opens fire. Rachel dies, and Broussard escapes. Will goes to Alexander's house, which is under police guard, and announces the cancellation of the deal with Snyder. He is ready to let him run, but Snyder starts talking about Katie signing his death warrant. Will shoots the traitor and blames it all on Broussard. At night, people see Rachel's hanged family, and Katie promises Broussard her support. Will lets his wife know he's aware of her participation in the resistance. The following night, a spontaneous uprising occurs during which several red helmets die. Beau asserts that people's patience has run out. Will informs Snyder that he has information about a new rebel cell located beyond the wall. Apparently, there exists an unknown passage to the authorities. He asks for permission to let them go beyond the wall and check. Snyder agrees but assigns them a guard. Meanwhile, Broussard and Katie go to the leader of the youth cell, who proposed a joint attack on the minister. Everything is to happen in the subway, now used only by the masters. Will and Beau, having gone beyond the wall, climb a skyscraper and survey the entire city. They then simulate an attack on themselves. While their guard tries to figure out what happened, their commander finds a map supposedly lost by the attackers. Later, Will points out to Snyder the marks on the map, indicating the rebels' attack points. Snyder reports the found tunnel under the wall. Members of the youth cell show Katie a micro-drone, shaped like a bee, capable of flying anywhere and gathering any information. The rebels finalize the attack plan. Broussard teaches Katie how to shoot. At that time, red helmets led by Snyder come to Nolan's house, accusing Charlotte of hiding valuable paintings from the masters and arresting her. That evening, Katie finds a book about the benefit of the arrival, given to her daughter by Lindsay. She immediately calls Will and tells him about how the new church is indoctrinating children. Will then informs her that they will move to Beau's house, located beyond the wall, accusing her of spying on him, but Katie can no longer bear it. They constantly lie to each other, and it's killing their family. And hiding, even beyond the wall, is impossible. Will asks Beau to run alone. Katie and Broussard, killing guards, descend into the subway, open a backup entrance, and the group infiltrates inside. The rebels cause an explosion, derailing the train. Searching the wrecked wagons, people find an alien's body. Will learns about this and heads to the station, where the governor soon arrives, announcing the kidnapping of a master. There was already an incident when 2 aliens died, leading to Dallas's destruction, so people must understand what awaits Los Angeles if they don't find the missing master. At the same time, a group of rebels transports the alien to a secret location, blocking signals with metallic foil. Will rushes home and asks Maddie to hide the children. She suggests taking them to the green zone. He tries to find Katie, and Bram gives him a secret number his mother received the day before. While the rebels try to move the alien to another location, a curfew is declared in the middle of the day. Maddie and the children end up in a huge queue, and as they try to break through, Bram runs away. Meanwhile, the rebels hijack a red helmet's car and load the alien into it. At the same time, the police receive subway camera footage. Will recognizes Katie but doesn't show it. Bram runs to his teacher and leads him to the tunnel. Meanwhile, the group that kidnapped the alien moves through the city in a police car and witnesses a house being shot to intimidate residents. Snyder is removed from his position, but the governor can do nothing. Meanwhile, the alien is brought to a laboratory, shielded from any observation methods, and they attempt to open his suit. Will gives the rebel codebook to Jennifer. Together, they review the operation footage from Broussard's arrest attempt and identify the U-Cell leader, who is also in the database. The rebels figure out how to activate the communicator on the alien's wrist when Will knocks on the door. He asks to hand over the kidnapped and run, or he won't be able to save them, but Katie refuses to open the door, instead breaking the isolation, forcing the rebels to flee through a secret passage. At that moment, drones converge on the house, Katie opens the door, and Will calls the police. The alien is taken away. Snyder thanks him and gives him a universal pass beyond the wall. Simultaneously, Bram and the teacher descend into the tunnel and are caught by the police. Snyder is taken away by the patrol. Will goes beyond the wall to find his son, and Katie returns to an empty house. This concludes the first season. An alien race from the depths of space colonizes Earth. Millions of people from around the world are sent to work in mines on other planets. Those left on Earth are controlled with implanted tracking chips and giant alien robots positioned around the perimeters of cities. Oh wow, you hear me? Ah! Chicago, 2019. The city is under martial law due to a massive alien attack on all major cities of the world. The Drummond family, a father, a mother, and their 2 sons, tries to leave the city, but all exits are blocked. When a police officer stops their car at one of the exits, the father presses the gas pedal and breaks through the blockade. Entering an exit tunnel, the man is forced to stop as the exit is blocked by aliens. Taken by surprise, the father freezes, although his wife asks him to turn around. Suddenly, an unknown pulse tears through both adults sitting in the front seats. The children, looking up, see an incomprehensible creature standing right in front of their car's hood. 9 years later, the world, having surrendered without a fight to the invaders, is completely under their control. The operation of vital productions, including power plants, has been restored everywhere. The aliens are called legislators because all laws and rules now come from them. Over the years since Earth's surrender, the aliens have forced humans to build suitable living spaces for them underground, called closed zones, where only high-ranking human officials are allowed entry. It became clear that the alien invasion aimed at Earth's resources, their extraction, and exportation led to huge social stratification. The rich, working for the aliens, continue to live well, while the poor have lost all guarantees, including education and healthcare. Police lawlessness thrives, and the deportation of all undesirable people from the planet has begun. The alien systems block all communication lines, so people know nothing about the life of other cities and countries. Amidst this wave, a resistance emerged, planning an attack on the closed zone in Chicago. But the plan failed, the zone was unharmed, and the fate of the rebels remains unknown, although the police assure that they were all eliminated. And this was supposed to be the first spark from which a flame would ignite. 9 years after the failed uprising in Chicago, the police monitor anyone who raises even the slightest suspicion. Detective William Mulligan reviews video recordings from Gabriel's apartment, whose brother Rafe died in the uprising and was posthumously named a hero of the resistance. The guy goes through his usual morning routines, then wakes up his girlfriend, showing her a photo taken on the other side of the lake, where visiting is now prohibited. But the girl does not want to believe in a change in their lives and asks not to invent the impossible. Gabe leaves the house where his friend, who has obtained and repaired a boat, is already waiting for him, so they can sail out of the city tonight. But Gabe reminds him that he is under round-the-clock surveillance. Meanwhile, Mulligan reviews the newspapers and sees an advertisement for the Phoenix fire suppression system, after which he goes to his old friend Jane, who now runs a brothel. At the entrance, he sees the Phoenix emblem on the wall and notices the police chief. The owner greets Mulligan as a good friend and hands him a gift box, mentioning the Donnans and their gifts. Returning to the police station, he shares his findings. Phoenix exists and is preparing something for the New World Masters, but his partner does not believe that anyone could have survived the last purge. At this time in the subway, 2 resistance members meet because the newspaper advertisement is a battle readiness order given by their leader, whom they call First. He has learned that there is an entrance to the zone through the stadium, and soon there will be a Unity Festival which high-ranking aliens will attend. The only thing left is to infiltrate. The next day, Gabe goes to work, having passed through the recognition system, since every person now has an identifier chip inside. The guy works in a data restoration center where he views millions of private videos a day and checks browser history requests. He sends all the collected information to the Central Information Center and destroys the carriers. Later, he receives a cigarette containing an unknown substance from his colleague and hides it behind his ear. After work, Gabe exits to the outside with a crowd of other workers and sees arriving guards grab and lead away one of the women. At the same time, an alien transport ship is sending off another batch of people as slaves for the alien mines from Earth. And around the perimeter of the city stand giant alien robots to prevent people from escaping. Gabe goes to the boat but is horrified at the sight of the weapon in his friend's hands. If they get caught, they will be instantly destroyed. Their scuffle is interrupted by the appearance of Mulligan, who orders Gabe to get into his car. He reminds the boy that he was his father's partner and now asks not to repeat his brother's mistakes and make the right choice. Gabriel has no information about Phoenix, and he does not intend to snitch, so the conversation goes nowhere. Gabriel goes to the person he is supposed to sell the acquired cigarette to, but the potential client pushes the boy into his van and, putting on them special collars that jam the tracking chip signal, drives him to the center of a destroyed district, where in one of the surviving buildings, Gabe meets his living brother. After a joyful reunion, Rafe tells him that he is the only survivor from his group. Unknown to him, Craftsman removed his chip, and now he has joined a new group. He takes the cigarette and, giving his brother a large sum of money, orders him to leave the area because Phoenix plans to attack the invaders. The brothers argue about the necessity of the uprising, but Rafe is sure that as long as there is time to fight, they should fight. Gabriel then rushes into his apartment and hurriedly starts packing, convincing his girlfriend to join him. The girl tries to persuade the boy to stay, and seeing the money and learning that Rafe is alive, asks the boy to think carefully, as they could then be recorded as accomplices. The couple argues, unaware that the police are closely listening to their conversation. Gabe leaves alone, but immediately encounters Mulligan, who was following him. Gabriel runs away from Mulligan and hides in the secret passages underground. He puts on the remaining collar, and the aliens' drones do not lose sight of him. Mulligan returns to the station, where he has an entire room dedicated to Phoenix and notes that Rafe might be alive. At this time, Rafe's carrier pigeon reaches the recipient, and the information is passed along the chain to a secret IP center, where upon entering the received numbers, its worker displays Phoenix's target, an official who will gain access to the closed zone that day. The newspapers immediately publish Phoenix's announcement, and the group members receive the call. One of them, working on the radio, plays a conditional track heard by a man with a dog who immediately takes her for a walk. Her bark is heard by a mechanic girl who rushes to her car. Later, they arrive at an underground clinic where a doctor performs complex operations to remove the tracking chips. Then, he hands over the chips extracted from law-abiding citizens previously deceased from diseases, as well as special containers that need to be kept in the mouth, so they too will be recognized as law-abiding citizens. Meanwhile, one of the resistance members, serving as a priest, meets with Rafe. The pair goes to an arms dealer and receives invisible explosive material from a girl extracted from a crashed alien ship. If attached to an organic carrier's skin or hair, scanners will not be able to detect it. Later, the resistance group gathers together. The leader distributes containers with new chips and shows a photo of the person who will go to the aliens. Lastly, he hands out poison capsules to everyone, which will help avoid being captured alive by the enemy. The group freely enters the festival and attaches the invisible alien explosive device to an official. He goes to the arriving aliens and explodes with them. The city is immediately locked down, and the police block the streets to find the attackers. The priest is the first to die, caught in gunfire. Rafe is caught by one of the aliens and tries to escape from it, hiding in a van. This is seen by the guy's comrades, who come to his rescue and destroy the alien. The surviving rebels try to escape from the city, while the aliens bring in hunter warriors from another world, and they quickly track down Rafe and his accomplices. Enraged, the legislators prepare to destroy the district where, according to their information, the resistance is based. Mulligan tries to persuade the police chief, who is heading to report to the aliens, not to allow this because he needs time to catch the suspects. But he is reminded that the decision is made and his search interests no one. Raids begin in the city, during one of which Gabe is captured, while his brother and 2 of his comrades reach the station and board buses 2 minutes before the expiration of the chips from law-abiding citizens. But when it seems they have managed to escape, the buses are stopped by the hunters. Realizing his capture is inevitable, one of the group takes the poison capsule. The mechanic girl attacks a hunter and is instantly vaporized. Rafe tries to run but is captured and brought to the police, where his brother is being interrogated at the same time. Mulligan shows him how Rafe is tortured to make him talk about Phoenix and give up first. Gabe learns that the city is preparing for destruction and agrees to send a message to the leader. He is brought to the surviving members of the resistance, and hearing that the guy allegedly knows ways into the zone, they agree to connect him with First. Gabe is brought to Jane Doe, who is number 1 and the leader of the resistance in the city. Upon seeing the boy, the woman calls him by name, which confuses Gabrielle, and at that moment, a police squad raids the brothel and kills Jane. The investigation reveals that Jane had installed listening devices to record conversations with police officers she served to gather secret information. Later, during a briefing with the aliens, Mulligan names the members of Phoenix who, learning about the death of First, voluntarily left this life. Before the invasion, Jane was a history teacher and changed her profession to gather secret information. Mulligan presents recordings obtained in the brothel, where it is heard that the police chief actively leaked secret information about the aliens. Captured resistance members are deported to alien mines, and Mulligan, having declared the neutralization of the Chicago threat, is appointed acting commissioner. Later, he meets with Gabe and puzzles the boy with a new thought. What if the failure of the uprising was planned? And he hands the boy a memory card, extracted from a phone once given to him by Jane. The next day, Gabe views its contents, a video dedicated to a party before his birth, where close family friends record messages for him. There, he sees both Mulligan and Jane Doe, who was acquainted with his mother, as well as some other members of Phoenix. Meanwhile, Mulligan is allowed to arrive at the Earth Control Center and meet with the legislators in their habitat. As he heads to the spaceship, the same invisible substance that was part of the explosive used in the stadium attack manifests on him, explaining that Mulligan is also part of the resistance, and the plan was organized so that he could infiltrate the main alien base and set off an explosion. During the credits, a map shows that the plan worked, and the city blockades were successfully lifted, after which many resistance foci flared up everywhere. This means that the plan to light a match and ignite a bonfire was a success, and humanity begins an active fight against the alien oppressors. Despite the film being labeled as science fiction, the message here is quite realistic. How will humanity behave when it realizes the possibility of its total occupation? Also, the filmmakers draw belief in victory from the history of humanity, using Lenin's motto, "A spark will kindle a flame." The struggle, the underground conspiracy, the film is full of revolutionary stylistics, and it watches like a real political thriller.